Always a hard time to get back after lunch and get these things kicked off. So everybody out in the virtual world, welcome back. Again, thank you very much for attending. We greatly appreciate it. We had a great lunch here, so I hope you all enjoyed a break as well from where you're watching from. So at this time, we're going to kick this thing off again, and we're going to continue the theme with some accident data. This next portion is going to be on the United States and European helicopter accident statistics and trends. I think that's a key component to a lot of what we're talking about is, in fact, to be able to create assessments and mitigation strategies. One of the things you have to have are the data points, as I've said, and that data points where we get our trends from. I'd like to welcome back to the stage John Franklin. We'll also have him joined later from the FAA, Mr. Lee Roskup. He'll be joining him for the U.S. piece. So we'll start off with the EASA piece. So John, if you take the stage.
Thank you very much. Good to be back. If it helps, before being head of safety promotion, I was head of safety analysis. So I understand what this data is and the process and what we designed in terms of how we put the data together. So I'm just going to go through a couple of, just to give you a little bit of context of what we do with the data. There we go, perfect. So I'll look at the process just quickly first and like I say, what we do with the data. And then I'll talk about the data itself. Yeah. So we have this thing in Europe called the European Plan for Aviation Safety. So it basically, as we were talking about, setting priorities in different areas. It sets the safety priorities for Europe in all domains. So it's split into kind of organizational strategic issues, then commercial kind of air operations, rotorcraft, general aviation, drones, etc. In terms of the data that I'm going to show you, it's this year's analysis of data for 2021 and the previous 10 years. We specifically split it into 3 broad categories for the types of operations. So traditional commercial operations, which include stuff like HEMS and things like that. Then what we call part SPO, so it's more the special operations, so all of the stuff like agriculture and survey and all of that kind of stuff. And then general aviation, and that's where the training element is as well. So it's split into those 3 buckets. And we specifically focus on what we call key risk areas, and you have a problem. We've specifically what we call accident outcomes that we call, so we were using the CAST ICAO occurrence categories, and some of those are outcomes and some of them aren't. So we created something called key risk areas, which was really interesting in a European context. The first time we did a meeting about these key risk areas, somebody asked us at the end in the questions, who's this Greek guy you talk about, Mr. Key Risk Area? And it's effectively, it's the ICAO occurrence categories, but only the ones that are outcomes. And then we look at the safety issues and we use some other data in terms of risk classification of occurrences. One of the biggest problems we have in Europe is the collection of flying hours to make accident rates. I see Gilles slightly giggling at the back. Thumbs up from the European colleagues and the European Helicopter Association. It's the most embarrassing problem we still haven't been able to solve. We're doing a lot of work, particularly with Gamma on the GA side, to use surveys kind of similar to I know a lot of the US data. So that hopefully helps quite a bit, but it's still the biggest problem we have. We don't have rates, much to our embarrassment. So in terms of where this sits, we have a safety risk management process that makes our European safety plan data driven. So we start with identification of safety issues, looking at accidents and serious incidents as per ICAO Annex 13 definitions. And then we also have a European occurrence reporting process that we then capture all of the reportable occurrences that get reported from organizations to, excuse me, the 31 national authorities, and they all go into a central European database. So we also do analysis then of those as well. But what I'll show you is largely focused on the accidents and serious incidents. So we have the identification of the safety issues themselves, and we create what are called safety risk portfolios for each domain that capture the accident outcomes, these key risk areas, and the safety issues that are associated with them. Then we pick individual safety issues specifically and do assessments of those safety issues at a more detailed level. And then from that, we then get the definition and the programming of the actions that we have in the European Safety Plan, and it then feeds through. We also then do something called the best intervention strategy that is still a process that's learning and improving, but tries to look at the impact on industry of the different things we're trying to do. Then we go into the implementation bit and then monitoring of performance that kind of closes that loop. So I'm going to get straight into the analysis itself now. So this is collectively accidents and serious incidents from 2011 to 2021. And as you can see, it kind of matches a little bit what Nick showed earlier, that it fluctuates. Some years are better than others. There's no, when it goes down, like we had in 2015, and I was in safety analysis then thinking, oh, great, it's gone down. We've had some improvement. And then the years that followed were considerably worse. And we haven't really had any, things haven't improved significantly. You'd love a great downward sloping chart over the previous 10 years. And it's just not where we are in terms of that. In terms of fatalities and injuries, it's, as you can see, there is a sort of degree of downward trend, but we still had in 2021, 13 fatalities and 11 serious injuries. So, in terms of target zero, we've still got quite a long way to go in statistical terms. If we split that into type of operation, what you can see here is the commercial air transport on the left-hand side is kind of the lower of the three, slightly, although it was the middle one in 2021. The special operations type stuff then being the second highest, and then certainly GA non-commercial operations being the highest in terms of the average that we had collectively over the previous 10 years, and then in 2021 as well. So this is the CAT helicopter picture, and I guess we take some positivity from the fact that we didn't have any commercial accidents in 2021, 2 non-fatal accidents and 7 serious incidents. But some years we were in the same position in 2013. So again, there's no kind of resting on our laurels here. It doesn't, even at the whole of European level, just looking at the commercial air transport picture, the numbers are quite small, and it just takes one bad year and a couple of accidents. So, if nothing else, it highlights the need to just continue these collaborative efforts that we have here. So one of the things we do with our data is the classification of accident or serious incident is quite broad, and particularly on the boundary, some accidents can be classified as serious incidents, some serious incidents end up classified as accidents. That area is a little fuzzy. So we have something called the European Risk Classification Scheme, which basically looks at how bad could it have been, i.e. how big a helicopter was it? And we don't say, oh, well, it was a 20-seat helicopter, but it only had 3 people on board. We look at the worst case, how many people could have been on board. And then we look at how close to death and destruction was that accident, i.e. how many barriers were there between that occurrence and the worst case death and destruction type accident. So for commercial air transport, there's what you see on this graph here is along the bottom is the number of high risk occurrences we had, and then the aggregated risk score. So what it starts to do is it says, well, all accidents aren't the same. There's greater risk to life for a damage event, perhaps, or less risk to life for a damage event versus a high impact, high energy loss of control or something like that. So what we see in commercial air transport, and as I say, these are actual occurrences now, is airborne collision, obstacle collision in flight, and aircraft upset as the highest risk. So the higher risk being in the top right-hand corner of the graph there. Now, it'll be interesting. You'll see how that compares to the other 2 parts in a minute, which is particularly relevant in terms of what that means for our priorities. Oh, sorry, I've gone the wrong way. When we look at special operations, so again, we have had less occurrences in 2020 and 2021, but in the absence of rates, that doesn't necessarily help us identify, well, are we improving based on the number of operations or not? Let's say continual problem we have. Now, this is where it starts to show is in terms of special operations, particularly aircraft upsets start standing out much higher, and then with obstacle collision in flight and being much less And that they're kind of the main focus, particularly in special operations. And then when we look at GA, again, the graphs do kind of similar things. So, we're not nailing something suddenly. There's lots of challenges still to be overcome, and as I say, continue the collaboration and really start to hopefully be more proactive, particularly with safety promotion, to reach almost like the unreachables that we talked about a little bit earlier. Is the people who probably are going to have more likely to have accidents in terms of people and organizations are not likely to be the people that come to events like this. And how do we reach those organizations and help them improve and all of these things? And again, the standout thing being aircraft upset, really kind of standing out even more here in GA. And I guess unsurprisingly, a lot of those are in training, people with less hours and experience, flying different types of helicopters, lots of things associated with that. And then just to give you finally a flavor of what that looks like in terms of the kind of safety issues we face. And there's lots of other then causal factor challenges that link to these, but separations in VFR operations, particularly in certain parts of the airspace, is a particular challenge. And we've got a lot of work both then on conspicuity, on understanding airspace and those kinds of things for different parts of the community. Obstacle clearance during low altitude operations. I don't think that surprises anybody in the room here. And there's lots of different pieces of work we're trying to do there. We're doing particular focus on decision making particularly, and kind of simplifying the mental thought process of, well, which are the most important decisions we need to be getting right, and how can we be really clear and focusing people's minds on, if you do nothing else, then get these things right. That's really important. Do operations integrated visibility, and particularly adverse weather conditions. We've got quite a lot of work. In fact, our topic of the year for European rotors is unintended flight to IMC, and lots of discussion on how can we really simplify and break down the key actions that people and organizations can do on that. Unanticipated yaw, loss of rotor effectiveness, bird strikes. We did some promotion collaboratively with Airbus helicopters with Bruce and Bernd and Alexander and Gilles and the team on that last year. We've got a follow-up video on wearing helmets that we're just finishing now, just to kind of highlight the importance then, if you have a bird strike, of wearing a helmet. Engine loss of power, particularly or not in commercial operations, handling of system failures, and then maintenance and continuing airworthiness related issues. So they're kind of the main safety topics, safety issues that we see, as a quick summary of all of the analysis that we've done across the different areas. And then what we've started to do is, I'll just kind of show you this for interest at this stage. In terms of getting people to simplify their thought processes around safety, these are the 6 key areas that we're starting to focus our structure of all our promotion work on. So around culture and mindset, around people, training, competence, this fit for duty that I talked about earlier. The resources box, again, we were talking about with one of the questions earlier, and ensuring that our helicopters are ready and what are all the right tools and infrastructure we need. And then clearly separating compliance and risk management as kind of 2 specific things. And then all around learning, and whether it's organizational learning, individual learning, etc. So there's that kind of basic structure that we're working on. And then what that relates to for our safety promotion program, and then what we feed into the discussions at VAST, is all of these different areas then around, people issues, aircraft and equipment, implementation of technologies, dealing with the environment, culture, and then similarly planning, decision making, and then different general operational scenarios. So it feeds across into that. And obviously it also feeds then into our rulemaking plans and all sorts of other things like that. But that's kind of how it's linked throughout the process. So the data and what we do with it. So the key takeaways from that, from our accidents, as I said, it really highlights the focus on collaboration at global level, pooling our efforts and resources to solve common problems. The data being the heart of driving our actions, and basing it on the data that we see, and particularly then driving our input into the VAST discussions. And then, the more we collaborate on common challenges, the better. I'm really interested to see what the US picture looks like that Lee's about to do. So, maybe I hand over to you now. Oh.
All right, so Lee Roskop, for those, some of you I know, some I don't. I'm with the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team. My day job is working for aircraft certification in the FAA in Air 723, our fleet safety section. So this morning we got to hear from Nick Mayhew, who is our industry co-chair from the USHST, and he gave some of the high-level numbers. Larry Liu, our executive director of the Aircraft Certification Service, went on to spotlight a few of the areas where we've seen improvements, seen challenges. So really, this presentation is going to dive a level deeper on that. And the way I'm going to do that is first we'll talk about fatal accidents by industry sector, talk about occurrence categories for the fatal accidents, spend a little bit of time on the non-fatal accidents by industry sector, and then wrap it up with some of the resources that are available to all of you. So starting out, this is a pretty well time traveled chart at this point in time. So our 09 through 18 chart that shows the industry sectors in the U.S. So basically to simplify the post-lunch math here, these industry sectors that are on the far left side of the chart account for 75% of our fatal accidents, are accounted for them in the 09 through 18 timeframe. Of course, personal private jumps off the chart as the one that's on the far left, the highest bar there. Then we settle into that 10 to 14 sort of percent, and then on the other side of that red line, things fall off rapidly to those that are in the 4% or so realm. So 198 fatal accidents that were in that 10-year time period. Now, for those industries that are on the far left side of the chart, those are the industry sectors that the USHST has been putting special emphasis on over the last 5-6 years or so, basically since we did our deep dive analysis in 2017 and started to roll out safety enhancements in 2018. We've been focusing on a lot of those industry sectors, since obviously that's where the bulk of the fatal accidents are happening. Now, fast forward, part of what I wanted to communicate in this presentation was in the 3-year time period from 19 through 21 is how that has changed. So you can see we had to change the vertical axis on this chart because personal private has gone from 22% of our fatal accidents in that previous 10-year period to now it's accounting for almost a third of the fatal accidents that are happening with helicopters in the U.S. And then you see the rapid drop off, and you see that 11 to 6% kind of range that's in there for the other industry sectors. Now, one of the things that I did on this chart was try to capture how things have changed among these various industry sectors, because I think it would be easy for us, when we see that the rate overall has not gone the direction that any of us really hoped that it would, to say, well, nothing's changed, or we've taken a step backward. And while that may be true for some of the industry sectors, we can see that it's not the case across the board. Just to point out a couple of the industry sectors on there that formerly were in the top 5 or so, but have seen nice improvements over the last 3 years. We see helicopter air ambulance, where there's been a 9% drop. We see utility patrol construction that has seen a 6% drop. Commercial is on there, law enforcement. Those are some of the industry sectors where that kind of improvement has occurred. So again, even though the rate, certainly that's an important thing, we want that to go down, but it doesn't tell us the complete story, which is why we have to dig a little bit deeper. So with that in mind, the next piece of this is the flight hour piece, how we normalize this by rates. Now, we get our flight hour data in the USHST from the FAA's General Aviation and Part 135 Activity Survey. It's administered annually. There's a 1-year lag from when the survey year is administered to when it's complete. So in other words, what I mean by that is our 2021 flight hours are going to come out in late 2022. So that's why you see on this chart CY11 through 2020, because 2021 results are not out yet. But you can see from the chart there that we've got 50% plus of our hours are flown basically in 3 industry sectors. We've got aerial observation, we have helicopter air ambulance, instruction training. And then from there, a couple of the other Part 135 industry sectors with Air Tour 135 and also with offshore. And then we get into the 4 and 5% industries, and then the 2 and 3% industries. One of the other things you'll probably note is that the GA survey categories are a perfect match for some USHST categories, but not all USHST categories. So that's why you see aerial observation, law enforcement, and electronic news gathering all bundled together on that. So I'm sure folks have already put together some of the pieces on this, or they've seen these kind of slides before. When you see the exposure for some of these industry sectors and the number of fatal accidents they have. We go to this next slide, it's not a surprise to see that some of the industry sectors almost blow off the right side of the chart in terms of their rate compared to other industry sectors. So personal private, obviously far and away higher than the other sectors. This is for 09 through 18. Then utility, patrol, construction, aerial application, some of those others that we saw on the chart that showed the percentages and the counts. For that same time period, our overall fatal accident rate was 0.68 per 100,000 hours. So that dash red line that you see cut through all those industry sector bars, that gives you an idea of the industry sectors that are pulling that average up, as well as the industry sectors that are pulling the average in the direction that we want it to be. So again, USHST's goal is 5-year average fatal accident rate of 0.55 or less by 2025. So this shows that we had a ways to go there. Now we go flash forward to 2019, 2020, and note that 2021 isn't up there, and the reason is, again, I don't have GA survey hours for that yet, so 2019, 2020 was as much as we could capture. Anything that's blocked in red for the industry and the rate, that means the rate took a step backwards. Anything that's blocked in green means that the rate improved. So what you see there, utility, patrol, construction, commercial, aerial observation, helicopter, or ambulance, they all improved. Now, you also see aerial application up there in the green, but you notice that I asterisked that one because in 2021, that was not a good year at all for aerial application. So I did not want to be misleading at all. When we get the flight hours for that, I expect that one probably is going to go into the red as well. So this gives you an idea, 2019, 2020, we were sitting at 0.8 per 100,000 flight hours, which is what Nick briefed this morning for what our 5-year rolling average has been. So pivoting from the overall industries to the occurrence categories, are basically what happened in the fatal accident is what this chart shows. And probably some of you have seen this before, but if not, that horizontal axis, those categories you see there, they're not ones that the USHST came up with. They're ones that are standardized. They're used by the Commercial Aviation Safety Team. They're used by the General Aviation Joint Safety, not steering anymore, Joint Safety Team, and it's used by the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team. And the reason for that is it allows us to speak a common language between those safety teams, because all of those are governed by a CAST ICAO document of definitions and usage notes. So when I'm talking to my counterpart on the GAJSC, and we were talking about a loss control fatal accident, we know what the definition of a loss control fatal accident is because we reference back to that document. That also helps us as the safety analysis team to make sure that we apply these occurrence categories correctly. So as has been mentioned several times by previous presenters, our high 3 for that 09 through 18 timeframe was loss control in flight, striking an object during low altitude operations, and unintended flight in IMC. So how's that changed as we fast forward to 19 through 21? So the block I have there is 51% of the fatal accidents have fallen still in that big three categories. You'll notice that the biggest bar on the chart right now, though, is the 15 fatal accidents that we have as unknown. And the reason for that is the NTSB final reports aren't out on those yet, and there wasn't enough information yet available from either a prelim report or factual for us to be able to accurately code what the occurrence category was. Interestingly, though, for those 3 categories that I have blocked in the red, of those 14 unintended flight and IMC fatal accidents, over half of those occurred in 1 year. Over half of those occurred in 2019. Likewise, for the striking an object during low altitude operations, over half of those occurred in 2021. I mean, I don't have a way to explain that. It's just kind of the way that the data falls out. It's really kind of remarkable. The loss control in flight is the only one that it's been consistent over that 3-year time period. There were 2 to 3 fatal accidents involving loss control in flight each one of those years. One of the categories that we're going to have to pay a little more attention to and maybe study some more is you see system component failure power plant has crept up to where it's basically tied with loss control in flight. So we'll see how that shakes out once some of those unknowns are ironed out when we get some more information. It's not that all of a sudden turbine engines became massively unreliable or that recip engines, that didn't happen. I can tell you for the ones that we have seen where we can make a determination right now, there's a lot of these where a required maintenance inspection was not performed or some kind of component was overflown. There's a few that were undetermined, but those are the kinds of things, more human factors related, system component failures related to the power plant. So if we look at these in terms of just cumulative percentages, that red line being cumulative percentages. It gives you, again, an idea of where it falls in terms of each one of those big high number occurrence categories. And it also shows you the magnitude change for each one of those. So you can see the unintended IMC number went up by 7% for this 3-year time frame, but a caveat of that with 8 of the 14 events were in 1 year. Basically, we've held serve on the striking object low altitude operations. Okay, 2% improvement, so negligible. Lost control in flight though, 10% decrease on that one. So, you know, again, if that holds, once all those unknowns get factored into these other various categories, that'll be something I think would be a nice improvement for that 3-year time frame. All right. What I tried to do here is kind of bring those two worlds together, the industry sector and the occurrence category. And the overarching theme that I wanted folks to take away from this one, these are the top 7 industry categories that led to 75% of those fatal accidents in the 2019 through 2021 timeframe. And I thought it would be interesting to see how the occurrence categories where those fatal accidents were occurring had changed for the 10-year timeframe compared to the most recent 3 years. And it also, I think this is a theme that'll be touched on by various speakers over the next couple of days, is the risk is different depending on what you're doing. That sounds like almost a no-duh statement, but sometimes I think we paint with a broad brush and, you know, lost control in flight is the thing we need to focus on. Well, yes, it is, but that risk factor may be higher for you if you're in, you know, one particular industry sector versus another. Let's take, for example, the top line there, personal private. You can see that in 19 through 2021, the unintended flight into IMC percentage doubled over what it was the previous decade. Aerial application, that one is very lopsided, where you go from 42% of the fatal accidents that were striking an object during low altitude flight in that 09 through 18 timeframe, 86% in the 19 through 21 timeframe. So we can go down the line, some of the ones that stick out, commercial. Again, we're only talking 4 events that happened from 19 through 21, but 75% of those involved unintended flight into IMC. So and again, if the chart is too small for you to read in font size, the blue color represents lost control in flight. The green color represents struck an object during low altitude flight, and the red is unintended flight into IMC. So again, the takeaway from this, know what your risk factor is, and it also helps you, you know, this morning there was some discussion about, hey, what do I do if I want to improve safety in my operation? Well, this gives you an idea of maybe where to start and maybe what USHST helicopter safety enhancements, hey, there's 16 to choose from. Which of the ones should I start with? And it's the one where I have historically higher risk area for my particular industry. So non-fatal accidents, I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. The USHST does not focus analysis on these. So what I will be showing will be based on FAA analysis and use of NTSB data. For those that have been following the monthly rotorcraft accident briefing for the last 10 to 15 years, you know that our overall all accidents have stayed very constant for over time. It's personal private, it's the instructional training and aerial application for our non-fatal accidents. So that, as you can see, accounts for 60% of our non-fatal accidents in that 10-year time frame. You take that out for the 6% and 5% industries, then you get 85% of our non-fatal accidents that are in that grouping there. So we fast forward that to 19 through 21. You see that not a lot has changed on this. You can see personal private still number 1. Aerial application has leapfrogged instruction training, and if there's one takeaway on the chart, the one industry sector that has seen improvement for non-fatal accidents is instruction training, where it dropped down 7% from where it was before. A lot of the other industry sectors you see there, you see a lot of 0%, 1%, 2% on the chart. So it's largely for non-fatal accidents been stable across the board in terms of where they're occurring. For rates, 09 through 18, again, you see those ones that we've discussed on some of the previous slides. They're still the leaders jumping off the top of the chart. The overall non-fatal accident rate for those years was 4.15 per 100,000 flight hours. And if we jump forward through 19 through 20, a lot of green on the chart, but if we use the context of, you know, the magnitude of change, again, a lot of these are smaller in terms of the non-fatal accident rate. So the big movers on there that you see, instruction training improved, aerial application, personal private both improved too, but they are so far to the right in terms of the rate. There's still a long ways to go. One of the other ones, Sightseeing Part 91, improved in terms of non-fatal accident rates. And overall, a modest improvement for the most recent 3-year time frame of 3.92 per 100,000 flight hours. So transitioning here towards the close of my presentation, for those that aren't aware, we have a new FAA resource that is out there. There's a U.S. rotorcraft accident database, or I'm sorry, dashboard that has been developed. So we have a QR code, so you might want to give that a try and see if it works. If it doesn't, then I invite you to the 128-character web address that is conveniently located on there if you have the patience to type it in. And if that doesn't work for you, I see there's a few folks that are still trying to get the QR, so I'll linger on the slide a little bit. But if neither of these works, and as usual, HAI makes it simple for us, it's on their webpage as well. And I'll show on the next screen, basically right in the middle of their splash page is safety, front and center. You click on that. Another click on latest safety information, and then a click on latest safety data, and you're there. So again, all else fails, go to rotor.org and you will find your way to the right spot. And these are the sorts of charts that you will see there. We have everything from just your overall counts for the fiscal year to the rates month by month, historical rates over the last decade. There's a make model breakdown that's on there. Percentage of fatal accidents as a function of all accidents. So really, I have to give massive credit to our aircraft certification Air 300 group, Eric Barnett, Peter Chin, Jaspreet Sidhu. They're the ones that developed this, and it's great. It's updated on a weekly basis. So please, I invite you to visit that. And finally, last thing I wanted to hit on was if you're interested in de-identified data sharing, I'd invite you to the SIAS program, the Aviation Safety Information Analysis and Sharing. John Wahlberg, could you stand up? John's a hard one to miss because he's a head taller than everybody else in this room. But John is the expert on this. If you'd like to participate in a program where you can funnel basically your data to a trusted third party, it's de-identified, it's aggregated with other data from the industry, and it's used for us to detect basically emerging risks before they culminate in accidents or fatal accidents. So there's a lot more to the process. I put John's contact information on there as well as the general SIAS address. But please, I'd invite you to talk with John about this. This program is relatively new for helicopters. It's been around for transport for years and years. More recently for a small airplane, and now we have it as a resource for helicopters as well. So that was my discussion for the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team data. I'm probably over on time, Randy, but as the song goes, Semisonic, I think, sang it best. 1998, every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. Time for me to exit, and probably the next person to take over.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. All right. Again, for Lee and John, thank you very much for coming in. And with Lee as the Aviation Safety Coordinator, of course, for the efforts that he does. And I get to work very closely with him on a lot of different efforts and meetings probably every week that they meet and talk and they work through. So there's a lot of effort gone into this. One of the things I've brought up for years, and that is I would love to see, a lot of this data is done by 100,000 hours, flight hours. And a data point that to me always seemed very interesting, even as far back as with the IHST days, was the accident rate as it related in helicopter industry to landings, operations. At any given time in the Gulf of Mexico, we were having 4,000 operations a day. So if you go back to that and you didn't have an incident, and that's something that to the team, I would ask that, boy, it would sure be nice sometime to actually see not only where we are in the 100,000 hour mark, but also to see where we are in literally the safe operations that are being conducted every day. I think that's an interesting data point that just doesn't really exist, even though we have the data. We're going to move into a technology piece now. As this goes into it, this is for our friends around the globe in our virtual world. We are, of course, coming to them through the internet world, and we're actually going to have a presentation next with Scott Chappell that is going to come to us through the internet world. So we're going to see if we can get all these little things to align and see how that's all going to work out. But just a little bit about Scott, especially for the folks looking in from the internet that maybe have not heard Scott speak before, and it's a new opportunity for you to get some of this information. A little on his background. Scott Chappell is currently a professor and chair of the Department of Human Factors and Behavioral Neurobiology at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. Before joining the faculty at ERAU in the fall of 2012, Dr. Chappell was a professor of industrial engineering at Clemson University from 2005 to 2012. Before that, he was a human factors research branch manager at the Civil Aerospace Medical Institute. In addition, he served over 16 years in the U.S. Navy as an aerospace experimental psychologist. He has published and presented well over 200 papers, books, presentations in the field of accident investigation, system safety, spatial disorientation, sustained operations, and fatigue. Dr. Chappell received a BS in psychology in 83 from Wright State University. Sorry, I lost my paragraph here. And holds a PhD in neuroscience from the University of Texas, another University of Texas group. Just so you know, I'm happy that it's in Texas. I'm a TCU guy, so just so you know, go Frogs for those that know. But we'll lean towards some UT folks too. I don't mind. So I hope y'all don't mind. I bask in that moment. But excuse me, how are we doing on getting him up there? Is he on his way? Is he there?
I'm
Scott,
here.
can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you barely. Hold on a second. We're going to get you up and running here a little louder. Hold on. Keep talking to me.
All right. Hopefully
Say
I'm
hello to
coming
the crowd.
through.
We're listening to you.
Can you hear me now?
You ought to be like, I think there's a TV commercial about that. I could be wrong. One more time. Give him one more test.
All right. Testing 1, 2, 3. Let's hopefully get you through.
Yeah, we got you now. So I'm going to back off and
Okay.
give it over. All right. Fantastic, y'all. Scott Chappell.
Well, thank you very much.
Let him know you're here. There you go.
I wish I was there in person, but I'm not. As many of you know, we had kind of an event here in Florida, and Daytona Beach, Volusia County was hit very hard. Myself and actually tomorrow morning, Dr. Burt Bouquet, who's also in this department, both of us were planning on being there, and both of us have major damage and are just glad to have power back. But I'm here. I'm at Embry-Riddle right now, and so I'm able to go ahead and present what I have to show you, because I do think this is very unique and interesting. Hopefully you'll agree with me at the end. This topic is basically, I don't know about you all, but I've been in accident investigation for the better part of my adult life. Pretty much the last 30 plus years, I've been either involved in accident investigation, analysis and writing about accident investigation, or expert witness testimony, and all things accident investigator. And the irony is that during my time as an investigator, as with many of you, I always was perceived as wearing a black hat. And even though I had no dog in the fight, I was trying to be as objective as possible. And I certainly wasn't playing pin the tail on the donkey. Is there anybody that knows me knows that's exactly what I don't do. And yet, when I would go to the accident scene or I would talk to people involved, I always was viewed as the black hat guy. And so to me, it was a question of why was that? And the reason why we're all perceived that way is because we're out there identifying what went wrong. In other words, we go out there to determine who did what wrong and why. And if you're on the other end of that investigation, the perception is that they're out to get me. I don't care if you, many of us in the auditorium there have had car accidents. I imagine most of you have. Those of you that haven't, here's the good news. Eventually you will. One of us is going to hit you. But the better news is you're going to survive. But the fact of the matter is, when the state trooper comes and now interviews you as a result of the accident, knowing full well it's your fault, how many of you feel like, wow, this is a really great guy. I can't wait to talk to the state trooper. He's such a nice guy. He makes me, because he's going to ask challenging questions, because he has to get at what caused the accident. He has to write a report. So the questions he asks aren't, hey, how's your wife and kids? Where'd you go to school? What did you have for lunch today? It's really more biting. And unfortunately, that's the nature of what we do in accident investigation. But what if, instead of just asking about what went wrong, maybe we asked what went right? In other words, not only do we look at what went wrong in the situation, but what prevented it from being a whole lot worse? As an accident investigator, I don't know about you all, but I've done many investigations, many of which the individual I'm interviewing tells me all the things that went right. Gosh, it's a good thing that Joe caught that. Otherwise, this could have been a whole lot worse. We would have lost everybody. Thank goodness, I got a call from air traffic. Otherwise, I would have been in a heck of a mess. There's always the good things, and we never really track that. So what I want to do is kind of walk you through an exercise, if you will, over the next 40 or so minutes to show you an approach that maybe you'll consider as you go forward. So let's see if I can get this rolling. Many of you, those of you that know who I am or have met me, have probably heard about the human factors analysis and classification system that Doug Wigman and I developed, almost 25 years ago now, while we were both active duty in the military. I like to refer to it as 80 pounds ago. And because back then I was a lot thinner, had more hair, and was a lot more creative. And but back in the day, back when I was a young lieutenant commander and Doug was a young lieutenant in the Navy, we developed a system called the Human Factors Analysis and Classification System, which I was using and developed initially for use in accident investigation, because we really didn't have a means for going out and looking at human factors. And that system, in a nutshell, is presented to you right here. I'm not going to go in detail because it would take a lot longer than the time we have. But I will share with you that we basically used as our foundation, if you will, Jim Reason's Swiss cheese model of human error, where he talked about the unsafe acts that people commit, the preconditions for those unsafe acts, supervisory issues, and organizational influences. And what we did in the development of this system is we defined those holes in the cheese, if you will. And we didn't, we weren't the only ones that have talked about this. This has been in the literature for years, but we kind of put it all together where it was kind of in blue collar terms that we could all understand. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, just very quickly, when we looked at unsafe acts, we looked at errors, the honest mistakes you and I make every day, and violations of the rules. And generally speaking, we would split those up into what we'll call decision errors or conscious choices we make. Sometimes we choose well, sometimes we don't choose so well. Skill-based errors that really involved automatized behavior, things we do without thinking. Most of what we do is skill-based. Most of what we do when you're driving your car, you're constantly making corrections to the steering wheel, pushing on the accelerator, pushing on the brake, turning on your turn signals. Many times you do that without even thinking about it. You carry on conversations. It's a highly practiced skill. When you got dressed in the morning, most of you, I would hope, didn't have to Google how to get dressed. You just kind of did it. You can do it with your eyes closed. Most of the behaviors we engage in are skill-based. Problem with those is they often fall prey to attention failures, memory failures, technique errors, and the like. Perceptual errors are a little different. This is using your five senses. Sometimes we misperceive stuff. We also look very closely at violations, those routine violations, the bending of the rules, if you will, and the exceptional violations where people are doing these very exceptional, oftentimes very egregious acts that ultimately lead to an accident. We're all very familiar with that. What Jim said is you have to look higher. What was different that day than any other day? And what we did is we defined what those preconditions were by looking at the condition of the operator. And very quickly, we looked at mental states, physiological states, and actually physical mental limitations, which were things that are inherent in our situation, that are longer term, where mental and physiological states tend to be shorter term. We also look at the situational factors, the physical environment, the equipment we're engaged with. We also look at personnel factors like communication, coordination, and planning, stuff like that. The nice thing about aviation is we do a pretty good job here communicating, coordinating, and planning our efforts. I can tell you, having worked in healthcare the last 10 years, they're not nearly where we are today. They're kind of, if you can imagine where we were 30 years ago when it came to CRM and the like, that's kind of where healthcare is today. There's not a lot of good conversation going on, and certainly no coordinated and planning. We also look at fitness for duty. How do I come to the job ready to perform? So I look at things like, am I getting enough rest? Am I self-medicating? Am I hungover and the like? We look at all those things. We also look at the supervisory tier. This is middle management, where most of us find ourselves. And here we're looking at things like inadequate supervision. And, hang on, didn't mean to do that. We look at, you know, as a supervisor myself, my job is to provide people the opportunity to succeed. So my job is to somehow provide you all the tools you need, the training, the supervision, the oversight, the mentoring, whatever it takes to get the job done, short of doing it myself. Planned and appropriate ops refers to making sure we're putting the right people in the right positions. You know, how many times have you been sitting right next to somebody and you're thinking, how did they get here? And you're kind of wondering. Or, you know, nothing's worse than failures to correct known problems, which is the next category where you're going to an accident scene. How many of you ever heard these words? Well, that guy was in an accident waiting to happen. How many times have you been around people that really are not qualified to do what they're doing, yet we just let it persist? As managers, it's incumbent upon us to deal with that, to correct those problems, either motivate the individual or move them out. Supervisory violations are rare, but sometimes we see where people sometimes will violate rules, managers themselves, or encourage people to bend or break the rules. When I was in the Navy, it wasn't common, but it wasn't terribly uncommon where you would hear stories of senior management, commanding officers, maybe department heads coming out and saying, "Chief, I don't care how you get that plane up. I want it flying by the end of the day." I can assure you the plane will be flying, but you wouldn't want to fly it because they're pulling out all the stops. They're taking out all the safety mechanisms. The same is true when we start looking at the organizational level. We're looking at the culture of an organization, the vision, if you will. We look at the process, the procedures, the policies, the oversight from the very highest levels. And finally, we look at resource management, that last category. How do I manage my human, my monetary and equipment resources? That's a quick overview. That's not the purpose of this talk. What it really is to give you a sense that this is kind of the face of human factors. And this is what many airlines, most organizations that I work with Fortune 500s all over the world, and most of them are using HVACs in some fashion. And so I wanted to give you this just to give you a sense of the background. But that's really not why we're here. Why we're here is to talk about something a little bit different. Because remember, the whole premise was, gee, wouldn't it be nice to look at what went right? And I want to start you with something a little bit different. I want to talk to you about a mishap that occurred in 2013, July of 2013, that many of you never heard about. And actually, it wasn't really a mishap as much as a near miss. We almost drowned an astronaut in space, if you can believe that. So in the short version of it, and I'm going to show you a brief video, the short version of it, basically we had two astronauts doing an extravehicular activity where they were doing some routine maintenance on the space station. And mind you, this is like the pinnacle of any astronaut's career to do these EVAs. They're highly structured. They're planned out well in advance. I mean, talk about being prepared. These folks are. Well, that day, there was a leak in one of the astronauts' spacesuits. Actually, it was leaking water into his helmet. And unlike down here in the good old planet Earth, if I throw a cup of water on you down here, it'll splash all over you, maybe go on the floor, and you might get a little angry, but that's about it. But if I throw a cup of water at you in space, now that water congeals into a ball and it kind of floats, and it really likes to attach to things like skin. And so this can become very problematic when you have water in a helmet, as we did here. And what I want to do is let the folks tell you what happened rather than me give it to you in detail. Let me see if I can get them started.
The International Space Station during US EVA 23.
Can you hear that?
The 23rd stage EVA that was performed for the International Space Station. About 44 minutes into that EVA, ESA, the European Space Agency astronaut Luca Parmitano, reported water inside his helmet on the back of his head. The ground team, Luca and his partner, Chris Cassidy, who's currently on board the International Space Station today, were unable to identify the water source. And as they continued to work, the amount of water increased in Luca's helmet and eventually migrated from the back of his head onto his face. That EVA was terminated and the crew, both Chris and Luca, were brought back inside safely. But what started out as a very normal EVA became one of the most serious mishaps in the history of spacewalk. Good news, it was also one of the best documented mishaps ever. So we're going to show it to you. So with that, let's go watch the movie. In 1998, work began on the world's most important scientific laboratory, the International Space Station. That work involved thousands of hours of design, testing, and wrench-turning manual labor. Because it was assembled for the first time in space, an area we call low Earth orbit, the astronauts had to don the iconic white spacesuit called the EMU, which stands for Extravehicular Mobility Unit. In these spaceships, for one, astronauts are able to work safely and comfortably in the most hostile environment known to humankind. Usually in pairs, astronauts exit the airlock of the ISS in order to begin what we call extravehicular activities, or EVAs. Most EVAs typically last about 7 hours, have been simulated several times, and involve slow, deliberate, and uneventful work. We like boring EVAs. But this one was different. I'm Chris Hansen of the EVA office here at NASA's Johnson Space Center and former chairman of the Mishap Investigation Board. I've been with NASA for 26 years, and over those years, I've encountered some truly amazing people, experiences, scientific discoveries, and incredible stories. The story I want to share with you today is what brought me to the Mishap Investigation Board, and in my opinion is one of the most important stories that NASA has to tell. When we almost killed an astronaut. On July 16, 2013, Italian astronaut Luca Parmitano and American Chris Cassidy began EVA 23 at 6:57 a.m. Chris and Luca, ready for another great EVA. Luca, you can head to node 1. Their task that day was to connect a series of cables for a new Russian module. Relatively uninteresting work. About 40 minutes into their 10-hour workday, Luca calls down to Mission Control in Houston, Texas, and informs them that his CO2 sensor has stopped working. Sensor dead alarm. Sensor dead. Copy. Major 48.6. Copy on, I got an alarm inside my helmet. I looked down, and my computer told me that there was a problem with the CO2. I went through the checklist. I realized that it was a sensor failure. The ground came back and told me, yeah, we agree it's a sensor failure. Just keep monitoring your health, keep monitoring your own performance, and continue with the EVA. This isn't necessarily alarming on its own. It's happened before, and astronauts are trained to look for the signs of CO2 buildup in case something goes wrong. So the alarm is dismissed. But nobody predicted that it would be the harrowing symptom of a much bigger problem. Six minutes later, about 44 minutes into the EVA, Luca calls Mission Control again. I feel a lot of water on the back of my head. Are you sweating? Are you working hard? I am sweating, but it feels like a lot of water. So we copied. This is highly unusual and might not seem like that big a deal until you consider the way water behaves in zero gravity. In space, water doesn't just run down the back of your neck and soak your clothes. Instead, it sticks to your skin like gel and moves freely along the surface of your head. Hey, Luca, while you're working there, can you give us maybe some more words on the water? Maybe
identify the source, you think, and then is it getting any worse or is it the same?
It's still the same, and I cannot tell you the source.
I reported that I felt something, some water inside the helmet. But my initial thought was, this is just a nuisance. It is not something that I'm worried about.
Over the next few minutes, the pooling water slowly increases in volume as Luca and the mission control team on the ground try to figure out where the water could possibly be coming from. At this point, Chris Cassidy stops working and goes over to Luca to try to help figure out what's going wrong with his suit.
Oh, I see. I see it now. Wait a minute.
And Chris and Luca, you guys can just hang tight there. Chris, you can continue to help troubleshoot if need be, but we're going to talk about it here for a minute.
At that call is when I had the thought of, oh, well, gosh, this is going to take the ground team a little bit, maybe 15, 20 minutes, half hour. But that's okay because we have this half hour buffer already, so we're doing fine.
I still don't understand where he's coming from. He can't even have it be the bag.
In the front of the EMU, the astronauts have a drink bag full of water with a straw that allows them to drink. Luca drinks all of the water to see if it stops from entering his helmet.
The bag is right now. Yeah. Bag is empty now, and so there's something less than a liter in the back of his head, 800 milliliters maybe.
Copy, Chris. We're talking about it.
At 61 minutes into the EVA, water begins getting into Luca's ears, affecting his communication headsets, instantly making a worrying situation much more difficult to resolve.
Hey, Chris, can you say about this thing? Radio check? Check, on check. Don't check, don't check. Yeah. Wondering if that is the water getting to my ears. Oh, yeah.
Luca, can you give us a status where you think, it sounds like we just heard you cannot hear? Is that true as well?
No, I can hear perfectly. I can still hear perfectly. But my head is really wet, and I am not feeling anything clear.
Because astronauts spend so much time in the EMU, they wear a special garment under their suit that uses water cooling technology and wraps tubes around their body to keep them cool.
So what I'm wearing is the liquid cooling ventilation LCVT. We've got these cooling tubes woven into the fabric throughout the whole garment. And what that does is as you work inside of the suit, you're building up a bunch of heat. The cold water goes through these lines and picks up the heat of your body. And then once these pieces are connected, the warm water, after it passes through all those lines, goes back into the backpack of the suit.
Luca offers that source as an explanation for the water, but it is ruled out and dismissed.
Right now, the flight control teams have the astronauts standing by while they continue to assess the situation.
Although the EVA is officially still active, the astronauts have stopped working completely.
Based on what we heard with Lucas saying that water is in his eyes now and it seems to be increasing, we think we're going to terminate EVA case for EV2.
It's important to note that the EVA has not been officially aborted. Luca's situation is not yet considered an emergency.
The most catastrophic situation is abort an EVA, and that means end everything, stop what you're doing, leave it all out how it is, and hurry as fast as you can back to the airlock, and whoever the affected person is probably is going to need some help. Terminate the EVA, which is the situation we are in, is really defined as, hey, this is kind of trending in a direction that we're not super comfortable with, but everything is okay right now. Everything is safe. We're doing fine, but we anticipate if we keep out here, it will get worse.
I had Chris, my buddy, outside with me, right in front of me, and I had to separate from him. And I had this feeling that it would have been so much better if he could just come with me. So I just thought, hey, the ground told me to go back. Chris, he is raising a concern. I shouldn't be concerned, and I can deal with this. But remember really well. It's a vivid image in my head that when I turn around, I just have this feeling. I just wish Chris would come with me.
As the standard safety protocol, the astronauts are tethered to the space station to keep them from floating away in the event of an accident. And although Chris and Luca are tethered to the space station, their tethers go in different directions, forcing them to separate as they make their way back to the airlock.
And he had already started to move, and the sun had just set. Now the sun sets, Luca turns the corner, and I have this image imprinted in my mind of the silhouette of his spacesuit turning around the backside of the space station into the darkness, and off he goes.
There's something to say about a sunset in orbit. It is not like one of those beautiful sunsets that we're used to enjoy here on Earth, where for several minutes you can enjoy light and dusk and the colors and all that. In orbit, it goes from pure white, bright light to darkness and complete void of color in instants.
The International Space Station orbits the Earth at over 17,000 miles per hour and takes about 90 minutes to go completely around it. A little less than half that time is spent on the side opposite the sun, blanketing the space station in total darkness.
So as soon as I separated from Chris, I started working my way back to the airlock. At the same time, maybe because of the motion that I did in the rotation, the water that was concentrated around my forehead and around my ears instantaneously covered my eyes. It covered my nose. In that split second, I knew I was in trouble.
In addition to that, Luca's ComCap assembly quit functioning, so he could no longer hear. So for the next 5 minutes, Luca was completely silent and alone.
Hey, Chris. I hear you, Luca. Go ahead. Luca, I hear you.
And I said, "Hey, Chris, I'm disoriented. I need some help."
I hear you, weak but beautiful, Luca. You tell me
I was lost. I wasn't sure which direction to take.
It's nighttime. He's on the back of the space station. He can't see. And if you let go with your hands, you are a free floating guy in space.
I couldn't even see the handholds that I was supposed to hold on to in order to go back. I didn't know how much time I had before the water reached my mouth and completely drowned me.
Thermal cover open. Yeah, we want to look at a hop in now. Do not connect your SCU. Chris, you will come in second and do the hatch ups.
While that was happening, I was hurrying up and coiling my cable that I had been made secure and leaving it there, and then going as fast as I could back on the front side of the space station down to the airlock to meet him there.
It's only once that Chris also enters the airlock that he's able to close the hatch and adjust his feet so he can see into Luca's helmet.
The water at this point is now around his head and entering his ear cups. All I was thinking about was closing that hatch.
Okay, Shane, the hatch is closed and locked.
Chris, great job. Karen, over to you.
Okay, here comes the equalization.
Roger that.
So now I'm inside the airlock. The airlock is closed and we are ready to repressurize. I had no way to pressurize, to counteract the pressure on my ears.
Hey, Luca from Houston, how you doing? Give us the status.
While the pressure increased, the pain became really unbearable. So I started yelling as hard as I could, as loud as I could, trying to send a message to Karen that was controlling the valve to slow down the repressurization.
With Luca presumably safe in the airlock, Chris's radio calls to him are all met with silence.
Did you hear that? Everything okay? You okay? You okay? Raise my hand if you're fine.
So that's when it just naturally, we never pre-briefed it or talked about it before or anything, but we just reached and grabbed each other's hand and I squeezed, he squeezed back, and I knew he was fine at that moment.
I'm trying to see him. He looks fine. He looks miserable, but, okay.
Copy, that's great news. Thanks, Chris.
I'm coming over.
Airlock Houston, if you could have some towels ready, that would be great.
Once they are past the airlock and inside the space station, astronaut Karen Nyberg and 2 Russian cosmonauts rush to Luca's aid to help get his EMU suit off. In their haste, a Russian cosmonaut rushes to remove Luca's helmet and is stopped by Karen. The suits have a delta pressure in them, and if you don't first remove the glove, you run the risk of the helmet shooting straight off. Karen catches this, however, and helps Luca egress the suit properly while he towels the water that's still clinging to his face. Luca was safely inside the space station, and his close call with death opened our eyes to a real problem.
All right, so basically, I wanted you to see that, to hear it straight from Chris Hansen what had happened, because I can't tell the story nearly as dramatically nor as realistically, because this was a no kidding near miss where somebody, our Luca, was likely to die. I don't know about y'all, but if I had been Luca, first of all, you would have had to clean my spacesuit when you were done, because I would have had a heck of a mess, because I'll tell you, I would have panicked. But what was very interesting about this case is that actually NASA did a very, very extensive investigation. And interestingly enough about NASA, they go in and they look at everything. The report itself is public domain, as is that video. You can get the full length video, which is about 1 hour and 20 minutes. But the report itself is about 1 inch thick. It's 250 plus pages, very detailed and very well done. And they, unlike what I'm used to in my world in aviation, at NASA, they look at proximate causes, intermediate causes, and then root causes, if you can believe that. And so imagine if you went in and you looked at the final report, you'll find a whole host of causal factors you'll see, and you can see the list up there. I'm not intending for you to read every one of them, but things like crew member training did not include this failure mode. The flight control team did not understand the failure mode. The MU hazard report did not identify the hazard. If you've read the report and look at the causes, you can actually go in with HFACS, which we did, and you can identify using HFACS. You can basically put these various events or these causal factors into the framework. And you can do that for the proximate causes. You can see how, for example, the ground team allowed time pressures of impending EVA to influence actions. That was a mental state. Large quantity of water from vent loop leaked into the helmet during EVA 20. That's a technological issue. So there's a whole bunch of things, and you can do that for all of the causal factors, which in fact we did. And what makes it really nice is now, traditionally, just like we do in any accident investigation, we can identify those boxes within the HFACS framework that lit up. And not surprising, there were many of them in this evolution. Things like resource management issues, inadequate supervision, plan inappropriate operations, failed to correct known problems, so on and so on. And in fact, when NASA saw this report, they're like, oh my gosh, we really are, we're in deep trouble here. We got a lot of problems. And that was when I've talked to the folks at NASA, one of the big concerns they have is whenever they have these major events like this, where there's been a very near miss, a potentially tragic outcome, it really gives the impression that the sky is falling, when in fact, maybe it's not good, but it's not as bad as we might think. And so what was nice when we did this, we were able to show the connections and all the stuff you traditionally do with HVACs. If you have the opportunity to ever sit through our 2-day workshop, you'll see how we do this. And I'm more than happy to give you information on that. But here's the neat thing about HVACs, and this is just to bring us up to where we are. You know, I know that I listen every year to all these talks where we talk about 80 to 90% of all accidents are due to human factors. I would argue it's higher than that, but I'll give you 80 to 90%. Okay. And if you start looking at these individual cases without any kind of unifying framework, in essence, you don't have something like HVACs where I can compare, you know, for instance, the problems we're seeing at NASA with maybe the problems we're seeing at ESA or the problems we're seeing in other industries. Same thing is true in commercial aviation or in aviation in general. One of the things we did with HVACs early on when I was with the FAA is we were able now for the first time ever to compare human factors within commercial aviation to general aviation and other industries. So it's very unique. It gives us the ability, it's kind of an overarching framework. So it was useful. It also gives us the ability to look at trends and other things. And I don't want to belabor that. But the truth of the matter is that's not what this talk's about. But nevertheless, just to kind of put the point home is assume for the moment, let's say we were to go in and identify, let's just go take a look at this box at NASA. Hypothetically, let's say we wanted to look at specific trends within communication, coordination, and planning within NASA. You could do that with HVACs by looking at an aggregate threat analysis where, and this is, by the way, this is hypothetical data. This is not actual NASA data. This is all stylized just to show you how you can use this. You could go in and look at 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. And you could actually plot what percentage of near misses had at least one communication, coordination, and planning failure. You could do that. And I don't think anybody would be surprised if I told you, well, on average, about 23 to 24%, give or take the given year, of near misses between 2015 and 2020 on an annual basis, about 23 to 24% of the cases had at least one communication, coordination, and planning failure. That's the actual threat. So this is the near miss. These are the red lights, if you will. We could do this for every one of the boxes within HVACs. And in fact, we did do this with NASA. And myself and Doug Wigman had a contract to work with them to help them do this sort of thing with their near misses and their ground accidents. So that's your actual threat. But that's not where the story ends. Imagine this. Imagine you decide to come visit me, not at my house in Florida, but instead at my home in South Carolina, where my wife and family live. They live up in Clemson, where I was a professor at one time. And imagine you went into our backyard. And when you looked in our backyard, you see this big, looks like a burn barrel. And you go up to the burn barrel, but there's no burning. There's no trash in there to burn. And you're like, looking at this, and Scott, what's this burn barrel in your backyard? I'm like, whoa, 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 that's not my burn barrel. That's my anti-elephant device. And you'd kind of look at me like I'm from outer space, or maybe I've lost a few marbles along the way. And you'd start arguing with me, and you say, well, how much did you pay for that? Well, I paid $10,000. That's my anti-elephant devices aren't cheap. And you'd probably look at me thinking, what an idiot. He paid $10,000 for an anti-elephant device. And we get into a discussion. I say, well, I've never had an elephant in my backyard. It must be working. In fact, my neighbors haven't had elephants in their backyards either. So it must have a pretty decent range on it. And you'd start looking at me like, what in the world? Because you can't prove to me that it doesn't work. I can prove that it does because I don't have any elephants. Now, this is a picture, by the way, taken in New York City when some elephants got loose from the zoo. So yeah, if they had had my anti-elephant device, hey, they wouldn't have had elephants, but I'm joking, of course. But how many times have you had safety programs where people have propped up their program and said, well, it works. If you take it away, the sky's gonna fall. You know, legacy programs, existing programs that we all know don't really work, but we keep pouring more and more money into them. without any proof that they're working other than, well, look, it must be working because the accident rate came down, when we all know that accidents can be due to a lot of things. Wouldn't it be nice if we could look at that? And in fact, we can. And what NASA contracted us to do is go look at the green lights initially as a proof of concept from EVA 23. And when you do that, you find out there were a lot of things that happened that day that prevented it from being a lot worse, the so-called green lights. Things like the EVA crew remained calm and with a professional demeanor throughout the emergency. Let me tell you, that doesn't just happen. As we all know, number one, I don't know if you noticed, but the American astronaut was a Navy SEAL. In fact, he had seen combat. He's highly, he was highly trained, and even within NASA, he's highly trained. If you ask anybody about him, they're saying this guy was the astronaut's astronaut. This guy remained calm throughout everything, and it wasn't a surprise. That's just his demeanor. Likewise, it turns out that Luca, the person that was in the emergency situation, was also Special Forces Italian. So both of them had Special Forces training and NASA training. That doesn't just happen. That's why they were so calm. You can go down this list, you can see other things like the communication between the ground. If you listen to it, the ground, the astronauts and the people on the ISS was very calm, very problem solving, not exaggerated, not excited. I mean, excited to the sense, to the effect that yes, it was something they had to deal with, but they weren't out of control. Resource management. I can tell you that to identify and become an astronaut is a multi-million-dollar endeavor. The amount of money they have invested in every astronaut, not just the training, but in the selection process itself, has come under tremendous fire over the years. Why are we spending all this money in selection? What's it take to be an astronaut? It can't be that bad. Well, guess what? These two astronauts were the perfect astronauts for this very dangerous situation. So somehow that process works. So resource management's a green light. And you can read these others, and I'm happy to share this with you. The bottom line is we can now take that and we can plot the green lights if we wanted to. And we can do that for every near miss, which is what we do now. When we go, we've been working with NASA for a few years, looking at all of their mishaps. And we plot not only the red lights, but the green lights as well. What do the green lights tell us? So let's go back to our original diagram. Remember that actual threat? Well, the green lights are actually, imagine, let's say we're going back to this communication, coordination, and planning issue. Remember that we said on average over that between 2015 and 2020, I apologize for the x-axis there, that the actual threat was around 23%, meaning that 23% of the near misses were associated with at least one communication, coordination, and planning failure. But what if we did the green lights and we found out that, you know what, on average, between 40 and 45% of the near misses were associated with a green light communication, coordination, and planning. That's actually the resilience you've built into your system with your safety programs. In effect, those programs, because we've identified them as saving our bacon, they saved the day. These were the green lights. We can now plot those and stack them on top of the actual threat. So the potential threat in the event those safety programs go away, this is what we're probably going to see. For the first time, using our HVACS framework, we can go in and we can look at resilience literally, and we can evaluate our safety programs. We have a tool now, red light, green light, that not only allows us to look at what went wrong, but what went right, and perhaps shed the black hat for a white hat. You would be amazed at how much more people communicate with you during an investigation if you start showing interest in what went wrong, not what went right, I mean, not just what went wrong. With that, I've come to the end of my time with a few minutes for questions, if there are any. And so I'm going to leave this up and open it up if anybody does have any questions.
Any questions from the group, the audience? Scott, I think you did a fantastic job. Thank you very much, and great understanding. What a great presentation. Round of applause, please, for Scott Chappell. Awesome. So, Scott, you actually bring us up to a break, so I'm going to let them do that if I can excuse everybody in the room. We got 15
Absolutely. I don't want to keep them from the break. In fact, I'm ready for one too.
Hey, sounds good. Fantastic. And everybody, audience in the virtual world, please, 15 minutes. I'm going to give you 5 minutes extra there. So if I could, 3:35 back in your seats, we can get this thing kicked off. Scott, again, thank you. Great job.
My pleasure. Have a wonderful day.
And for those
And enjoy
that
the rest of the
get
conference.
credit, I apologize. I was supposed to tell you earlier to head out to the desk to the left at 2:30, but I failed to do so. So hopefully there's some folks out there you could go check in with as well. So again, give me 15 minutes at 3:35 back in your seats. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Okay, welcome back. We're in the home stretch for today. So I'm what stands between you and an adult beverage. So I think you'll enjoy this next panel. We've got three people here to discuss how we reduce accidents and the severity of the accidents should they occur. I think that, we all recognize that unfortunately accidents happen. And when they do, again, there's a lot of people spending a lot of their time trying to understand that and mitigate the damage to human life. So there are three panelists, Thomas Gogol, Phil Jennings, and Tony Randall. Thomas Gogol will be the first presenter. Thomas is the current senior expert for product safety enhancement at Airbus Helicopters. Besides his 18 years of experience at Airbus in various technical management functions, he brings an additional 16 years of aerospace engineering experience in rotary and fixed-wing aircraft, ranging from maintenance management at Lufthansa and Babcock International, program management at Fairchild Dornier, and multiple years of working on aerospace research projects at Stuttgart University and the University of Tennessee Space Institute. So let's welcome Tony to the, welcome Thomas to the stage.
So thank you, Bruce. As a matter of fact, before I get started, yes, I'm the second German on stage today after John. And actually, we put that technology part of the panel first for a good reason, actually. Because when we look on technology, what is it in the helicopter world if we talk about relation to safety? Well, it's an enabler for safety or a protector if you talk about survivability features. And this is it, no? So it's basically an instrument, but then in order to really make it safe and reduce accidents and incidents, you need a good musician to play it. No? This is the pilot, the crew, and this is the organization behind it. And I think when we're drilling down later on to the core on how to reduce accidents, this is it. So we start with the technology part. You have seen that slide before, so I have stolen it from EASA, from John. That is again the commercial air transport statistics. Don't look for the small print now. I've really just clipped it from the aviation safety review, the annual aviation safety review from EASA. So I boxed the subjects that John was talking about. Now, if you look on commercial air transport in 2022, we have 4 highlights in the box, which I pointed out to the right. No? So there's the airborne collision, and that's a bit of the unique thing that only occurs in commercial air transport, and we only see that more in the European frame. We could analyze it why that is, but this is nothing for that panel. But then we have the 3 big ones on there that we heard quite frequently now during this day. It's the obstacle collision in flight, terrain collision, and aircraft upset or loss of control. So these are the 3 big things. And if you look on the statistics that John also showed from special SPO or general aviation, it's basically the same things in the box, with the exception of the airborne collisions just roaming around in the box. And we heard it also this morning from Nick, from the US HST. So that is basically what we are looking at when we are talking about things, how the accidents look like in our industry. So first human factors fault because it moves the wrong way here. So how do we get there? Now, engineers usually get up in the morning and dream something up, what gadgets they can build. This is not the case here, definitely not. So I take again the European way, how it's done, and you will see it's basically the same as it's done here in the US. So basically you sit down, you take your in this case, 600 to 700 accidents, you analyze them, you categorize them, you identify technologies that have the potential to avoid them, and you put them in a nice report. This was done by the EHEST, the European Helicopter Safety Team, the predecessor of the ESPNR. And the report that you see here from the NLR was published around 2014 and 15. Now then it was digested by EASA in the EASA Rotorcraft Safety Roadmap, and now you find the prime technologies from that report on the right page, which is basically the Rotorcraft Safety Roadmap of EASA. So this is in a very analytical way how those technologies find their way into a strategy document that is devoted to reduce the accident rate. So then you have heard this morning that it's basically the same process as it's done in UHSST. And then if you compile it up, and this is where things come together, it was then done in August 2021, still in an IHSF format. You know, all of those safety roadmaps were compared across the world, and to no surprise, they're all very, very similar and overlapping. It was compiled and written down in that letter, which was just the IHSS was morphing into the VAST at that point in time. So why is this, or what do we see? Now we see a very high stability of the issues in time. As I said, the NLR report is from 2014, and if we analyze the figures today or this year, it's pretty much the same. And from our perspective, or the Airbus perspective, because we're also analyzing the things in Asia, in Latin America, in Australia, it's also geographically very stable. No? So what we are shooting at here in terms of technology or accident prevention is a stationary target. It's not a moving target. Thanks God. No? So we don't need to do anything new every year, but we can concentrate of the stuff over many years, and it's really basically the same around the globe. So grouping the technologies that I would like to talk about in a few examples, then afterwards, we came up with 4 technology clusters. And starting from the right is basically the preemptive stuff, the flight data analysis, which can be HAMS or HFDM, we come to that. Then we have the survivability technologies and protection things that are on the right-hand side of the bow tie. And then we are actually approaching more the vehicle or the aircraft. We have the airframe and system technical improvements, but also never to forget the maintainer and the maintenance task and the task setups for improvement. It's not often mentioned too often, but actually we should never forget the technician side and the maintenance side of our business. And then the biggest and leftmost part, and it's biggest by a good reason, is the obstacle terrain and attitude awareness, automation, operation and real-time applications, how we named it, and training systems. We put the training systems there because those are the things that really address the operational accident that we mentioned before, and shall help to enable pilots to reduce those accidents. And training systems for sure are needed then to get the flight crews trained on those technologies. So now let me turn to a few examples to illustrate or put, say, an apple into each of those technology boxes. And I'm using, for that case here, mostly Airbus examples because that's the world I'm living in. But since the problem is the same, then you can transfer that to each and every manufacturer. No? So this is nothing, or most of that is nothing which is Airbus specific. Now we're really looking now on a light helicopter thing, which is the A-Star or Accurate or the H-130, you know, where we also now have the emanating glass cockpit. Now, if you get a new aircraft from us, then you find a nice glass cockpit in there. No? And if you order it, you even can get now an autopilot. So for the new aircraft, this is actually addressing a lot of things. No? You have, you know, the terrain and obstacle detection, still data-based and or active detection. You have the synthetic vision system, which enhances the situational awareness specifically for obstacles and terrain by a magnitude. Traffic information system, specifically very well developed here in the United States, you know, with all the ADS-B in and out services, still a way to go more in Europe. And for sure then the autopilot, if we are then addressing beyond the situational awareness, if we are addressing the recovery out of a loss of control, the autopilot with a recovery button, properly used from a properly trained pilot, can really help a lot. And I was putting that up for the light helicopters, the single engine helicopters, because this is where we see most of the accidents happening with dead recars. We also heard that from Lee Roscoe, that this is a focus that can be helicopter specific and related to the missions and the way they operate these helicopters. So changing to a survivability subject, also mentioned today, there's the FAA SAIB for a good reason for crash-resistant fuel systems. And again, not Airbus specific, for sure, every new built helicopter has one right now. But this, as for the cockpit, is not really the issue here. The issue, if you want to drive down the accident rate in a limited amount of time, and the EASA roadmap says 50% accident rate reduction by 2028, starting from 2018, then we have to be quicker than that. So we have to reach the flying fleet. And that is the big subject here. Now, it's certainly supported to a good extent by the authorities. Now also the insurers are kicking in at some stage. You know, and we have our type certificated solution here, again, for the A-Star, or the one at the A-Star. And we also have available for retrofit. We also have a STC available from Standard Aero to do so. No? So we are playing every instrument that we have in here in order to get it into the fleet. It's really not progressing as fast as we would like to see it for a significant increase in survivability of the helicopters. So reaching the flying fleet, and that holds for most of this technology, is really the big issue here that we have to overcome in order to reach our accident rate reduction targets in a given amount of time. Now, another one, I picked the HFDM and not the HAMS for a good reason out of the basket for the data-related technologies. Because here you can also have a wide range of what you do. Now, if you're a single operator or a small one, you can have, we have chosen initially the Apareo Vision 1000. Nobody that buys a helicopter with us can get around that. Now we install it, whether the operator likes it or not. And we have quite many operators that don't like it still. No? But as I said, now they can install it and see with the authority or they can get the equipment out, but that is the easiest type of equipment. And then you can go in level of severity. You can install equipment, you know, if you put HFDM organization where you do the manual extraction of data and processing of data and the feedback to the flight crews, up to a more fully automated type of HFDM tailored to each operator. So for each, I would say, purse and money that you might have, for each thing that you might do, the HFDM is available. However, what this technology needs, it's not only a place in the helicopter where you can install it, it's really an operator that uses it actively to its best account. I think this is the best example of a technology where the operator needs a highly developed safety culture and process to handle it right. But then I think it's a pure piece of gold to improve safe operation. So coming to something where we can identify a more critical flight state, which is again a newer technology that we have now brought up for the H160 where it's certified. It's a vortex pre-warning system that is displayed to the pilot, which is flying manually, which is based on a total energy extrapolation equation. So basically the helicopter calculates along the trajectory where it will be in 5 to 10 seconds from now, and where this is in the envelope of the vortex ring state and not. And then it puts up a caution in front and an audio alert in front of the pilot on the PFD. Or if you are in the vortex state, it also makes a very clear statement about that with a loud yelling vortex and flashing red message about that. On the H160, and it will also come on the 145 very soon and the 175 in the helionics system. We think that is also a very good enabler in order to prevent entering a vortex ring state rather than recovering it. We need to be able to recover it, but to stay out of trouble for us is still the better way than to get into the trouble. So all of that, and I said it before, technology is only as good as the pilots that use it. It's getting more complex. The glass cockpit is a very complex thing. Handling an autopilot is rather complex. Not bringing all the things aligned is rather complex. So the training is a big subject. What could be, or what actually is a game changer, one of the devices is out there. It's the virtual reality flight simulation. So we, as an example, we partnered with a Swiss company, which is VRM. They have done the first flight training device, EASA certified, which was a Robinson 22 that caught our attention. Then with an European operator, together they started evolving into the A-Star flight training device, where we then really got interested and got into the collaboration. That thing, the virtual reality training device, is really groundbreaking for us, and again, more specifically for the light helicopters, because that is a movable device. It is extremely realistic. Now you can move the training to the operator, and the operator does not travel a long distance to come to a level D flight simulator, and that, for me, will be a very significant way of the future to increase the training and also bring safety critical subjects more into the simulator and reduce the training of safety critical subjects in the aircraft, because here also we see many incidents and accidents happening from safety critical training actually done in the aircraft. So that was basically what we have available right now, or what is coming in the very short term. And to close the little excursion through the available technologies, I would like to point out or show you a short movie or a short clip about a flight demonstrator that we have, our flying laboratory, which is the H130, and the first steps into hybridization and what it can potentially do in terms of safety on that H130. So can you start the movie, please? Without audio stuff. So that was the last piece of technology I would like to show you then in the conduct of my presentation. The system was just the first trial, no? But I think it's already quite impressive what you can do with 100 kilowatts, valid for 30 seconds, and for a critical safety conditions as an auto rotation. I think it was really impressive also for us to see what you can do. At the very end, if you watch the movie, you see a very interesting thing if it comes to safety technologies. Safety technologies by themselves and alone are very hardly sellable, at least to the existing fleet. Because usually each operator runs on the money that he earns from his oil company or his hospital or his state that he gives him, and he cannot spend an unlimited amount of money into the safety technology. No? So if we are developing a safety technology, we do it smart. No? If the operator can develop a business case out of that. No? And for that one, it's not ready for deployment yet, but we have seen you can have a certain trade-off between a payload increase and the safety thing. No? For sure, you can also use the entire safety margin and increase the payload by a lot. No? Then there's zero safety gain, but a lot of payload gain. Or if you further develop the system, you find a good way, which is right in the middle, so that the operator actually has a good safety gain, plus an operational increase of payload, no? Which then ends up in its bottom line. And I think this is dominantly also the way how we have to look on safety technologies. Safety alone is great, but mostly not afforded by the operators. But I think that is also something that we might further need to discuss during that panel. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Gogol. Yes, the EBS and other technologies like this are, I mean, they're real, they're coming. And I think we're all going to enjoy the benefit of that in the very near future. So our next panelist is Phil Jennings. He's an active Part 91 and Part 135 rotary wing pilot and fixed wing pilot. He retired from the Army after a nearly 22-year career as an aviation warrant officer, a UH-60 Blackhawk standardization instructor pilot, and instrument flight examiner. In his post-military career, Mr. Jennings is an active corporate pilot and has flown single pilot IFR HIMS for 13 years and has diverse international experience in the 429, the 135, the 145, and the Sikorsky 76C+. In 36 years of continuous flying, Mr. Jennings has logged nearly 7,000 accident and incident-free hours and holds an FAA ATP certificate, a CFI, CF instrument instructor, and an NVG instructor endorsement. So let's welcome Phil to the stage, please.
Thank you, Bruce. Great to be here. Thank you very much for sticking with us as we move into the afternoon. I'm going to try not to make the mistake of the pointer here. The most interesting thing on this slide is probably the fact that I sort of regard myself as a student pilot since 1986. I really enjoy flying and enjoy these safety topics. I'm going to talk about three things today, two of which I think address head-on the question that's been presented, and that's specifically how do we reduce the frequency and the severity of accidents. And I'm going to talk about helicopter EMS operations in the United States, and we'll link that to Europe as well. Punchline, I think that the way we ought to move is 2 engines, 2 pilots, and have full IFR capability. Then we're going to talk about rethinking recurrent training. And I want to be very clear that my view on this is specifically oriented around recurrent training and some of the success that's occurring in the Part 91K world. And we'll give you some specific examples about that. So I've broken this up into 3 basic acts. Here's the first one. I borrowed this from Hamilton. If you've seen Hamilton, there's a line in one of the songs, you know, do we need a revolution or do we need a revelation? I actually think we just need a revelation. You know, when we look at the statistics throughout the day, helicopter EMS operations, you know, consistently is in the hot spot, and there are lots of issues that come up. Now it's gotten better in recent years, which is a really, a really positive thing, but we can't take our eye off the ball. I'm also going to touch on some of the things that EASA has recently announced to move in a new direction. So in one sentence, I think we need a coherent reimbursement model that incentivizes proven safety capabilities to reduce the accident rate and to increase patient outcomes. Helicopter EMS reimbursement models in the United States in particular are driven entirely by insurance. And I'm going to show you some statistics and some figures here that'll help put that into very sharp relief for you. I think there are two components to this. Number one, I think we need to increase the safety capabilities of the aircraft. Thomas has talked about some things that are either in development or very, very close to being deployed, and they're really positives, particularly in single engine aircraft, but also at the higher end, in the 160s and the 175s as they make their way into the market. The second thing we need to do is look at clinical excellence. So there are kind of two sides to this. I'm obviously going to focus on the clinical side of it to say, other than in the last 35 years, helicopter EMS operations in the United States has sort of has undergone a slow transition. It used to sort of be a motor vehicle accident, grab the patient and go. Pilots would work up to 72-hour shifts with provisions for sleep while they were at the hospital. Programs were initially sponsored by hospitals. That transition has really occurred in a pretty remarkable way. And now the patients are very, very often stable. They've been treated by paramedics because the EMS care capabilities in the field has improved. They may be transported to a community hospital for some initial stabilization. And it's at that point that the helicopters are activated to transport the patient to a higher level of care. So there's been a big transition, and it factors into the analysis. Let's talk about numbers. This is a follow the money proposition. So on the far right of the screen, I've circled the standard Medicare reimbursement for a helicopter EMS transport in the United States. Now, these data are a little bit old, but it's the only data we have to capture in a meaningful way by a third-party reviewer, kind of the facts and figures. So just accept them. I'm going to show you some other data in a second where these numbers have basically just drifted up. But the disparity is still in play. So the standard Medicare reimbursement rate for a HEMS transport is about $6,000. Now, there are two distinctly different models of helicopter operations in the United States as it relates to HEMS. There are not-for-profit operations, which may be just independent, or they are frequently venture capital or private equity, and in some cases, public company operations that operate HEMS as a truly for-profit business. And the for-profit distinction becomes very apparent when you look at the for-profit private equity model, again, controlling for a couple of years old in terms of the data, $32,000 per transport, whereas the not-for-profit operation is operating at roughly $20,000 per transport. How did we get here? There are basically four important considerations. The first is, which is the Airline Deregulation Act, and that basically captured in kind of an unintentional way helicopter EMS operations in the United States, and it sort of led to some funny outcomes. One of which is the case of Missouri and Wisconsin. Both states have about 6 million people. Both states are just under 70,000 square miles in terms of land area. But one state has roughly 13 medical helicopters, and the other, based on the reimbursement incentives, has almost triple that. So you get these really funny outcomes. Everything else being equal, you get these really funny outcomes. New data on transports in the second box in the upper right corner. For-profit hospital, for-profit HEMS operators are charging basically on average $48,000. And they engage in what's called balanced billing. We'll talk about that in a moment. The not-for-profit operations charge substantially less than that. Not quite half, but substantially less. Bottom right box. The profit motive is really compelling. And private equity, venture capital, and maybe even public companies, they're in the business of allocating capital. So they're going to allocate capital not because they like to see people in helicopters, but because there's a really strong motivation for them to be there. And so when we can't escape this model. So if you look at the revenue and the cost of transport, that results in the profit. Well, the cost of the transport is a function in many cases of the aircraft that the patient is transported in, the capabilities of the aircraft that's engaged in the transport, as well as the crew that's on board. So there are huge distinctions. You can slice this fairly finely, but the fact of the matter is the incentive favors the lowest cost operation. The lowest cost operation, single engine helicopters operated under visual flight rules, which in some parts of the country is really the way to go. And I don't want anyone to think that I'm bashing single engine helicopters, because there are lots of parts of the country, the Intermountain West, for example, where single engine helicopters and their lift to weight ratio beat a twin engine helicopter every day. Moreover, the en route altitudes, minimum en route altitudes are so high that you couldn't reasonably conduct IFR operations in some parts of the country. My concern is that we don't have the right incentives. Now, to their credit, and this is important, this is the box in blue, there are some hospitals and operators and standalone community operations that have recognized that there are distinct advantages in their market to invest in these safety capabilities, and they have. So we can't lose sight of the fact that there are some very positive things happening in certain parts of the country. Here's my vision. I think we need to have a double helix, borrowing from biochemistry. I think we need to look at one strand, I'm going to address it and just put it off to the side, that addresses the competency and the capability of the medical team aboard the helicopter. Who they are, what their credentials are, whether they have complete access to the patient based on the design of the interior of the helicopter, and their general scope of practice. Put that off to the side, but it's out there. Let's focus on what relates to what we're talking about today. I think the twin engine avenue and option provides very important mechanical redundancy, even acknowledging that single engine helicopters have become very safe. Single engine turbine helicopters in particular have become very safe. Secondly, the IFR capability is not really, and I think this is a big misunderstanding, the IFR capability is not really a desire to depart with weather at 300.5 or something like that and conduct a flight under hard IFR conditions, although sometimes that does happen. The real advantage of having an IFR equipped aircraft and an IFR equipped and qualified pilot is to deal with really rapidly declining and deteriorating weather. We've heard it over and over again. I kept track of the presenters that sort of talked about the issues related to inadvertent IMC, resulting in loss of control, sometimes resulting in control flight into terrain. They're linked, and we've seen it over and over today. And we're probably going to see it again tomorrow. We've also heard relentlessly discussion about human factors. My sense is, having flown 2 pilot helicopters in the military, single pilot US HEMS, and I'm an active multi-engine turboprop and jet pilot, where we literally don't taxi without 2 pilots. So I have seen and I've sort of lived the advantage and the progression that the profound advantages that a 2-pilot cockpit provides. I just don't think that 2 pilots simultaneously lose control of the aircraft in deteriorating weather conditions. I think 1 might become spatially disoriented, but I don't think 2 are. But more importantly, I think 1 or another of 2 pilots will prevent the aircraft from getting so far down the road that they actually get into deteriorating weather that's going to result in an inadvertent IMC scenario. So I think the 2-pilot thing is really important. But there's another factor. If that's not compelling enough, I forget who asked the question this morning, but what's the most important issue in our industry? You know, the hands just shoot up, like every hand up, basically, regarding workforce issues. So let's look at that, because this is depressing. In the period a 9-year period, we've had a net reduction of 771 commercially rated helicopter pilots in the United States. We've had a net increase, interestingly, of 159 ATP rated pilots. This is FAA data. These are FAA data. So something is going wrong. I have spent a lot of my HEMS career recruiting and retaining pilots, and the giant sucking sound over in the corner are the airlines and the fixed wing operation. And there are lots of incentives, particularly for young pilots. There are lots of incentives for them to leave the industry and to leave the helicopter industry in particular and go to the fixed wing industry. And that's not going to help us. So our problem is likely to get worse. I see this, the two-pilot avenue, as a way of having two effects. One, I think it addresses the human factors issue that I talked about earlier. But I think secondly, it's our farm team. And I meet on a fairly regular basis pilots with 750,000, 1,200 hours, whatever it is. And it's going to be a very difficult road for them to get to the 2,000 or the 2,500 hour level in order to be marketable to one of the HEMS operators in the United States, including the company that I work for. So we have to somehow change what we're doing, and we need to bring people into the industry, and that could very easily become our second pilot, which is also our farm team, which has the advantage of reducing the human factors components in these accidents and laying the foundation. Because if they're not going to reach the bar and get into one of our cockpits, they are likely to respond to the incentives, which are very, very compelling, and go to the airlines. And I think over time, if we're not careful, all of Thomas's technology notwithstanding, we are going to see that number work against the future of our industry. I don't think that's particularly helpful. Having access to the patient is an important consideration, but you cannot have, it's mutually exclusive. You can't have full access to the patient and have a second pilot, or in the EASA speak, they also have provisions for a technical crew member to occupy the cockpit, the second seat in the cockpit, because that's frequently where in a single engine helicopter the patient goes, as many of you know. This opinion was released by EASA literally last week. It's 40 pages. I pulled out what I think is the most pertinent provisions that bear on my tiny slice of our pie here. If the installation of a stretcher precludes a technical crew member from occupying the front seat, that helicopter needs to be phased out. HEMS operations in Europe is a function of having two people in the front seat, a pilot and a second pilot, or a pilot and a second crew member. And that's what the second and third provisions here drawn from this opinion state. So in a very real sense, Europe is ahead of us in a remarkable way. This is becoming increasingly non-negotiable in Europe. Final slide on this topic. And the next two topics just have one slide each. I think we need to incentivize safety capabilities. And I think the way we do that, so the double orange line, that indicates our helix that I talked about earlier. So the right side of the yellow line is the medical side. Let's just put it off to the side for now. Then we start with a baseline. And the baseline would be a VFR-equipped aircraft, one pilot, and it could have one or two engines. So it could be an EC-135, for instance, that isn't operated IFR. Fine. That would fall into this category. And we're going to reimburse that at 100%. But then when we step up, and this is where the insurance companies are going to have to lead on this, because the FAA can't lead on this. The NTSB comes in after the fact. Many hospitals have done this on their own initiative, but to their financial detriment. It's really going to come down to the insurance companies acknowledging the advantage in terms of a safer healthcare system, which they support, of having these safety capabilities built into the aircraft. So when we move out of the single engine realm into the twin engine realm, it goes baseline plus. Now, we could say baseline plus is kind of our index, and then we take these penalties. And what I envision is essentially a column of adds and deducts that would arrive in a very methodical and structured and disciplined way that would arrive at what the reimbursement for any given aircraft would look like. This is tall order, no question about it. But if we want to reduce the frequency and the severity of accidents, just plug in this analysis into the data that Lee provided us and that we heard from John and so forth. So it all connects back to that. Okay. Let's rethink recurrent training in one slide. So recurrent training is really important, and it's historically been based and predicated on aircraft proficiency and scenario-based training. That's sort of a newer thing, probably 10 to 15 years old. I also think that recurrent training really needs to emphasize operational procedures. You know, most GOMs are like 400 pages thick. Most pilots use and interact with probably 20 of those pages. There's all this other stuff that most people in the normal course of operations, they just don't have exposure to, but they need to be re-exposed to it at recurrent training. So how do we shake it up? If the biggest achievement of walking out of recurrent training is that a pilot has their, renewal certificate, Part 135, check ride, whatever, complete, and they go to the airport and they go home, and the biggest achievement is that they have that certificate. That is just such a hollow victory. It's just hollow in every way. Recurrent training needs to re-emphasize the training, and it needs to reinvigorate pilots and reconnect them to the aircraft and how they operate by challenging them to think in terms of, aeronautical judgment and decision-making in a very applied sort of way. I'm not sure it often does that. So we need to reincorporate operational procedures. Okay, but here's the innovative part. So NetJets, Part 91K provider, they operate a huge fleet. They have thousands of pilots, like 2,400 pilots. And they have gone in partnership with the FAA on a fleet-by-fleet basis. And so they've changed recurrent training from being purely a manufacturer, aircraft-specific thing. And they're focusing on 4 basic things. Number 1, prove, then improve. So 2 pilots show up at flight safety or their sim partner, and they'll do a flight, sort of like a line-oriented flight training flight. They'll do a flight. The examiner is sitting in the back. Okay, we did a takeoff. We might have had a V1 cut. We've climbed out. We've woven in some steep turns and other airmanship. And in the process, the pilots have demonstrated proficiency in those areas, and they are signed off. If they've demonstrated proficiency in steep turns, not doing steep turns again. So number 2, this moves from a pure skill-based training endeavor to a decision-making and judgment endeavor. So think of it in terms of, from CFI days, rote, understanding, application, correlation. We move out of the rote and understanding into application and correlation. That's where the real learning occurs, because that's where the judgment occurs. That's where the decision-making occurs, and developing the skills for better judgment and more refined decision-making. Number 3, has to be done in cooperation with the FAA. What NetJets has done really resembles airline training. So 91K begins to look like Part 121 training. We need to do that into Part 135 training. And it's going to take some company with a profound leadership inclination to tackle this. The key concepts, the 4th thing. So human factors, decision-making, and line-oriented training. So that once we get past the basic things in that training period, let's say it's 3 days, whatever, those pilots are now doubling down on the things that they have almost self-identified as their training weaknesses and their shortcomings. And by creating a training scenario that helps them address their shortcomings, V1 cuts, for example, fixed wing, and we could come up with the same stuff in the helicopter world. They leave there not just with check ride complete. We've de-emphasized the check ride. We've completely emphasized the training and proficiency, and we leave with better pilots. last point. Okay, so what happens when alphabet soup collides with alphabet soup? I'm gonna say it right now. Don't say Jennings doesn't like urban air mobility. That's not the case. Not the case at all. What I'm concerned about, though, is what happens when these aircraft are deployed, and what happens when they have a loss of lift and they're flying over New York City. And if anybody has flown in New York City heliports, as I have, it's really challenging for two pilots in a really sophisticated aircraft with all the bells and whistles to do safely. But when we look at this, and this whole industry is really oriented towards the user, the professional consumer type of aviator. If Anderson Cooper on 60 Minutes can get into one of these things, a Joby, and with like 4 minutes of instruction, fly around and feel pretty confident, you can just imagine what will happen in terms of the consumer influence. But they're not immune from all the rest of it. They're not immune from the big three that we've been talking about all day. They're not immune from inadvertent IMC. They're not immune from loss of control, and they're not immune from collisions with penetrating obstructions into the national airspace system. And when you don't have the foundational discipline that comes from sophisticated FAA ratings, I don't know how it ends. And I don't know how the New York congressional delegation in particular is going to feel about these things zipping over, if you take this to its end state, over Central Park. I think, it's a very, very complicated thing. So that sounds like I'm negative. I'm not. My concern is, in one sentence, who pays the price in the court of public opinion? Is the helicopter industry going to pay the price? Is the fixed wing community going to pay the price, just aviation in general? Or is an entirely new category going to pay the price? I hope that's the case, because all of the investments that Airbus has made, that Thomas just talked about, in terms of the technology advancements in single engine helicopters, will really mean nothing. We've solved the problems in a sense. We've chipped away. We're getting to the 0.55 standard. But now if we're lumping in a whole new set of accidents with a whole new type of aircraft into our industry, in a sense, it will be a really unfortunate and really incomplete victory. So I think we really need to think critically about this. I think there needs to be a campaign, and frankly, I think it needs to be like, that's over there. I think it is probably best for our industry if it's not considered a helicopter operation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil. Yes, UAM is certainly something we're all going to have to consider in the future, and maybe the future is today. Our final panelist is Tony Randall. Tony joined Bell. Many of you know Tony. He's been around for a long time here in Fort Worth. He joined Bell in 2011 after a 21-year career in the Marines. He was promoted to his current role in 2014. His responsibilities include oversight of Bell's safety management systems, flight safety from engineering concept to aircraft delivery. That's quite the span. Worldwide product safety, safety risk management, and accident investigation. Tony holds an FAA ATP and flight instructor rotorcraft helicopter rating, commercial airplane single and multi-engine land with an instrument rating. He is a member of the GAMA Safety and Accident Investigation Committee, the Society of Experimental Test Pilots, and the steering committee for the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team. Let's welcome Randy to the stage, please. I said Randy. I did it again. Tony Randall. We joked about this at lunch. I apologize, Tony. There's your
We only met this morning. I liked how when he said our next speaker. I'm kidding. We know each other fairly well, so. Yeah. So thanks. It was really interesting listening to the two guys before me, and what they were talking about. So I don't have anything left to say. They covered it all. But I will hit on a couple things again. And it's part of what I do on and off through the past couple of years. I have dealt with the medical industry with the MOA and a couple of the others at certain times. So I've heard some of that before, but it's pretty interesting talking about, especially your industry, because heavily regulated, and also the insurance companies are heavily invested in what you do. So I think you have a opportunity there to use that as a way to incentivize, right? And let's just face it, that helps them a little bit. You can't get things on aircraft if people can't afford them. You can't build on them things out of unobtainium, even if you know they'd work. So you got to figure out a way to make something that's cost effective that'll go onto the air vehicle that the customers will pay for and is also useful. So it's a challenge, but I appreciated that point of view. I'm going to try and stay right here. So if I start to wonder, and you might have to tell me to get back on the mic. So thanks for having me. We'll talk a little bit about some of the things you've already heard about. Let me see if I can make sure I hit the right button. Yes, down is up is down. Normal in my world. So kind of focus, and we'll talk a little bit about what Bruce didn't mention, and I crossed out earlier, and I didn't cross it out on purpose. We just tried to make it shorter. But I've been on the VFS safety committee for a lot of years for the Vertical Flight Society, and the difference between the VFS safety committee and the VFS crashworthiness committee is hitting the ground. So we've kind of tried to split it in that, and so the safety committee is, how do I make it so I don't hit the ground? What can I put in there? And then the crash committee is, okay, I've hit the ground. Now what? So how do I make the outcome less severe? So we're going to talk about what we kind of focus on now, and then maybe a little bit of where we should be focused on certain things, and they cross over, quite honestly. So if you look at, and I'll just go down it so I stay on track here. The equipage, standards for what you have on an air vehicle that goes out into a certain operating space depends on the vehicle size and the operations that they're going to perform. 135 has some different items that they have to have by regulation, or by their MOPS, or by their operating environment, right? So at a minimum, at very minimum, you have SCAS, SAS, and maybe IFR. But then if you go to the enhanced IFR, I'm gonna hit IFR a couple times. It's I think we talked about it once or twice today already, but double IMC or UIMC, a loss of control, resultants of that, and some of the other things that happen. So IFR, you see it down in training, right? So IFR for some things is a minimum, for some things it's an enhancement. If you can get it, you should, but if you have it, you should also train to it. It's a tool and a something in your kit that if it's not required by your operations, but you have it and you don't use it, then when you do get in a bad situation, then you don't have the currency and the competency to do what you're supposed to do. So, but looking at the list of enhanced kind of things that you can do for equipage, most of those things are already out there, right? And we've been using them, and you've seen things like CFIT. CFIT's come down quite a bit since the advent of moving maps, if you just run the data on it. Something I'd really like to see is active obstacle avoidance or active obstacle detection, because right now most of it's passive. If you can get so LiDAR's coming down. You have some electronic computer-based LiDAR systems now that are coming out. We're trying to look at some of the stuff that they use in the automobile vehicle industry and bring that over into the air vehicle side of the house. I will say one of the things that's done from us, and it's not any secret, we've been playing, a little bit in the past with urban air mobility, air taxi type stuff. And we've also got some light delivery drone type stuff we played with. But what that's done for us a little bit is allowed us to play into some of those technologies that currently aren't ready to be put on a certified air vehicle by the regulators, and maybe advance them a little bit and bring them back into the technology, or bring the technology to a level that hopefully we might be able to find a business case to plug it into an aircraft and have people use it. So LiDAR is one of those. CVFDRs have been mentioned. You can put it on the aircraft, but if you never use it, the only time it's going to get used is when my guys come see you through the accident, and that's not the way they're supposed to be used. It's a good purpose. it's a helpful purpose for me and for the NTSB, but you have things out there where if you have a good you can do leading indicators, basically near miss reports, those kind of things. Somebody talked earlier about the accident that didn't happen, or when we don't look at things that didn't happen. Well, if you have one of those and you actually actively have a program, you can automate the programs, and you can look at things that almost happened. They didn't happen, but they almost happened, and you can dissect those. And that's a lot better learning that way than it is to go to the thing that did happen. So equipage is all good, but you can equip the aircraft all day long. We go down to training, currency, and competency. IFR is one of those. Emergency procedure trainers, personal minimums, all of those things we talk about. Actually, nobody's mentioned personal minimums here that I don't think. Did I miss it? Maybe they did, but you know, you go to HAI or Heli Expo for the last couple of years, and there's always somebody passing out. And I don't remember if it's IHST or USHST or who it is, passing out the personal minimums cards, right? So I think if you are not in a job where you're always going and kind of have yourself set, and you have something where you fly intermittently, or you're on again, off again, or you take a long time off, you may have, you know, you get your regulatory minimums, you may have a business operational set of minimums, but you should probably also take a look at that. It may help cage your brain into what you're comfortable with. And it's better to know that before you go than have to make that decision. You make the decision before you're put in a pickle. So these are anyway, just a couple of things that are out there that are useful that don't cost money, right? Culture, safety culture is a big thing. You heard I have the SMS, you know. I was speaking of something last week, and I was talking about the scalability of the safety management systems. When I first started in this business with Bell 11 years ago, the safety management system was something I'd heard of. I don't know much about it. So we get into the FAA, the initial voluntary program, and that's when I started to learn, right? And so 11 years later, here I am. We've got a FAA accepted corporate SMS, which includes everything we do. So it's going to be design, manufacturing, aviation, the whole 9 yards under one umbrella. But in that 11 years, I've gone from being somebody that's like, to being, I basically drank the Kool-Aid. So, and quite honestly, I think if you look at the tenets of SMS and the things that are built in there, once you start plugging them in, you can throw the safety word out. It just becomes your management system. It's just your management system. It's just the way we do business, and you're not emphasizing the safety word. I don't say that because we're a safety conference that we should minimize safety. I'm just saying it should just be the way you do business. So, but I do also realize the scalability thing is a problem for a lot of organizations. And some of the places I go and talk, you'll have, you know, one ship operator with you know, an AMP that he hires on the side, and he's the owner operator. And, you know, you're going to tell him to have an SMS, you know, look at himself in the mirror and talk to himself about his risks for the day. I mean, you have things like that, but you got to talk through them a little bit. And so I think Chris had a good idea today. Risk is a good place to start. And if somebody's been a competent professional pilot for quite a while, they probably already do that fairly well on their own, especially if they're a small operator. But I like the just culture process. If you have 2 or 3, if you can, so root cause corrective action, not many people are good at it. I've been doing it a long time, and I still miss sometimes. I'll turn something in and they'll go like, that's just another symptom. And you're like, yeah, I missed. So, and some of the people that work for me. So the just culture process, though, you get to that root cause, it takes you to another level of root cause other than, yeah, that guy screwed up, and he screwed up because he didn't do his training, and he didn't do his training because he's delinquent. But then you go, well, he didn't do his training because he was sick, and he came back, and nobody's, you know, he never got the message that he was required training. You just go unloop the rest of it. And it ends up being the company may, or his boss, or somehow somebody didn't support that part of the organization. And where you go with that is you save a valued employee, you fix whatever hole there was in your organization. And so I'm just saying, if you were at a mid-level organization or a smaller organization and you're having a problem saying, this is a giant beast and I don't want to eat it, the way to eat an elephant's one bite at a time, right? I would start, if you look at your risk stuff and think it's okay, I would go with just culture. And that's my plug right now for SMS, because we've been doing it for a while. And I think that's probably been the most helpful thing. And then if you are in an organization that thinks you're doing well, I would go out and Google Safety 2. Safety 2 is not, it takes what you have now and plugs it in better, and it goes into the safety is not an add-on. I was fairly impressed with the, I hadn't heard of Safety 2 until about a year ago, and I went to a presentation. I'm like, what is this? And I listened to it. I'm like, that's pretty cool. So if you have a larger organization, go there. So that was all preventive type stuff. Mitigation of outcomes. If you want to talk equipage, Thomas talked about quite a bit of equipage, so I won't go into it completely here, but it goes back again to CRFS. So I'm going to hit CRFS actually. You can offer you can offer things, but they have to have an uptake too. I know there's 1 or 2 professional organizations that have a fleet of our air vehicles that weren't completely CRFS, and there's a kit. They came and bought kits. I don't think anybody else has bought any kits. So you've got a bunch of aircraft flying out there, personal, private, maybe ag, maybe, I don't know what they're doing. I could go look, but I haven't done that deep dive. But there's stuff that's available out there that's been proven to be good that we in this room talk about, but somebody out there isn't getting the message because we still have aircraft flying around, and it's not mandated. Those are older aircraft. So anyway, my point being, it goes back to help helmets. How many people wear helmets? I mean, if you're flying grandma around on a canyon tour, you're not wearing helmets, right? And I'm okay with that. I get that. I've flown quite a bit without wearing a helmet, and I'm okay with that. But in certain operations, in any operation actually, but in certain cases, a helmet is going to save your life. You know, somebody was talking about earlier. I've seen one or two guys with head trauma that they look perfectly fine, but just a knock on the noggin, and there they go. So if you have an operation where you have some reason to not wear a helmet, okay. If you don't have a reason, you really have to think about it. And there's a good paper out there. It's probably 8 or 10 years old now. It talks all about it and has metrics in it. Training, competency, and currency. The training thing's a big thing as well. Competency and currency, I think, is a big thing. And I actually like Thomas's picture of the simulator there, because and it's not on here. I kind of put some easy things on here where if you don't have a simulator, but I think using simulation devices for EPs, especially if you have something you could have LTE in or something. You have guys that did their initial training, got their commercial license, and maybe do their biannual, but they may or may not got LTE in their biannual. They may or may not got one or two, and that's just the way it is. I mean, even if it's on the list, sometimes that doesn't occur. And so having the ability to do that, even if it may not simulate the aircraft exactly, if you can get the eye-hand coordination down, you know, it's very helpful. But then I throw some other things out there, some things you probably don't think about. So if you're underwater, if you go over water all the time, there are underwater egress trainers. I know if you're in the oil and gas industry, that's a mandatory item. And then you have certain things that you probably don't think about, but an annual egress drill. Do your pilots know how to do an emergency shutdown on the aircraft? And you can do that just shutting the aircraft down. Shut it down. You can make them do emergency egress. Okay, shut it down, do an emergency shutdown and jump out of the aircraft. And you can do it safely. You can have a co-pilot in there minding the controls in case the guy fumbles it and catches his pant leg on the controls. He doesn't, you know, damage your helicopter. But you should think about things like that because God forbid you don't need it, or God forbid you do need it. But if you do need it, you've done it once, and you know that your headset is hooked to a 90-degree instead of a straight out on the aircraft side, and it doesn't yank you backwards and you on your butt, right? So it comes out. Little things like that you learn by doing that. And then an aircraft emergency plan. I think most companies probably have those. If you don't, you should think about it. So I need to talk a little bit about, that's where we are focused. Most of those things I talked about were already out there. They're already in place. They're already in play. They're already being looked at. And it was both, you know, mitigation of having an accident and then mitigation of injuries after or outcome once it happens, severity of outcome. But here's the one I think, and unfortunately, and I say unfortunately, we've talked about this today multiple times, but if you look at this is the FAA data and the giant pieces of the pie, you know, you've got personal, private, aerial application, instructor training, and those are, and then HEMS and whatever the next two are, HEMS and law enforcement. So those are usually the top ones. Air Tour pops up in there sometimes, but this is accidents right here. So this is actually all accidents. And this is only US data. Remember, this is fiscal year. So this is this year's numbers through August. And I think Lee showed this earlier, so I don't berate it too much. And then you look at, here's the fatal accidents. Again, you have, you know, personal, private, the same players up top, personal, private, instructor training, law enforcement, firefighting. Personal, private jumps though from being 20% of the total accidents to actually 35% of the total fatal accidents. So proportionally off there a little bit, but excuse me, he's telling me to get off the stage. But my point there is, and we talked about it. I'm not telling you anything we haven't talked about. Somehow that part of the organization is, or that part of the industry is who we would like to talk to, like to reach out to, and those people that need the, if they're not available to come listen to things like personal minimums and, you know, and your flight test or your flight risk assessment process, or learn things like that, then how do we give them things on their air vehicle that provide them a safer environment to operate in? Because it's obviously continually, year after year after year, that's where the problem lies. And so how do we, as a group, reach out to those, to the personal private instructor training? You know, I don't know if that's a rule change. I don't know what that is. I don't want to get too much into that because I'm not deep into it. I'm CFI, but I haven't done much in quite a few years. And quite honestly, most of the people I've flown with have not been for many years now, have not been the 20-hour guy or gal. So I don't know, when you have a 500-hour person teaching a 5-hour person, I don't know if that's the safest environment. So, but that's not for me to decide. I'm just pointing it out that they are always on the high side of accidents and fatal accidents. So I think those two to three industries are where we need to go. You will notice the ag guys went from 20% of the accidents down to whatever they are, 10% or 10% of I think that's their operating environment. They're usually low and fairly slow when they lose something. Those are the biggest things I had. It's interesting to listen to everybody talk here. Like I said at that last slide, we hit on a lot of the same themes. I think, but I think overall currency, competency, and having an organization, the organizational culture and the organization you work for, having the ability to say no, are how we do it. And everything else has mostly been in work and is out there. Take advantage of CRFS if it's out there for your vehicle. And that's what I got, Bruce.
Perfect. Thank you, Tony. Oh, super. Yeah, don't leave your stuff here. So we're drawing to the close. Tony just said something that made me think. So probably many people in this room have heard Krista Hagen speak. She had the misfortune to be involved in a helicopter accident, a HIMSS accident, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. And it struck me, so Tony was talking about training and, understanding emergency egress or underwater egress. And by the way, and I don't work for Survival Flight or Survival Systems, but there's a company in Groton, Connecticut called Survival Systems. They do underwater egress training. I would say if I set aside, some of the more advanced training I've had in a helicopter, their training has been the most valuable to me ever. If you've not had underwater egress training, go do it. It's stunning. It's amazing what you learn. But in that same vein, so Krista had the misfortune to be in this helicopter accident, and the ship stopped on the surface. She was on an elevated structure that crashed on the surface, maybe 30 feet down. And she had been through training, and she's a very competent nurse and a person who takes safety seriously. So she knew what to do. She braced herself. When the rotor stopped turning, she pulled the tape out of the window, and then she tried to kick the window out, but she forgot to pull the door seal. She had had training in how to do it, but how many people in this room, and not by raise of hand, just think, how many people in this room have ever jettisoned the door in their aircraft or jettisoned the window, pulled the tape and moved the window? So, or I'll use an example of a Puma. The Pumas have general cutout handles in the overhead. How much load does it take to pull that handle? And it's actually a fair amount of load. It takes a fair pull to do that. So, but if you haven't been trained to do that, you don't know. Even us, competent aviators, before we had simulators, the frangible discs. We got a frangible disc in the fire bottles to fire the fire bottles. Then we go into training in a simulator, and no one will blow the fire bottles in the sim because they've been taught just to kind of push towards the frangible disc, not to break it. So again, with technology, hopefully we can improve the survivability of these accidents. Does anyone have any questions before we finish for the day? I believe Randy was going to come up and do some ending comments, but does anyone have any questions? I only have one for the group, and this came to me while they were talking. So when we look at safety, whether it's a system, technology, or an idea, is it the concept which is most difficult to obtain? In other words, having a good idea. Or is it the development of that concept? Is it the certification of that concept? Or is it the application of the concept? And before you answer, in my mind, I think of on an autopilot, right? You have to have the idea to build an automatic flight control system for a helicopter, but then you have to develop it. That's difficult. Then you have to certify it. That's damn difficult. But then you have to have people use it so that when they need it, they can use it. So anyone in the panel, what would you say is the most difficult part of that?
So let me take it first from a technology perspective. I think really the concept behind it is really the most complex one, because if we have a concept that really addresses a safety issue, then the other stages behind that are simpler. And specifically the last stage, which is the application, is then also much simpler. If the concept is wrong, if you have a half good system or a half working system, or one which only does 25% of the job, then specifically the application afterwards will be much more complex. We also not yield the result that we are looking at, which is the reduction of the accident rate.
Super. Tony?
Yeah, actually, it's all hard. But I do think you have to have a good concept. And then when you do the concept before you move on, before you move into you have to do application at the end of the concept and development phase, because if you get that wrong, you're going to send them a box or a product. It may do what you want it to do, but it may be so complex to use that nobody's going to use it, but they're going to shut it off. And we see that sometimes. There's systems out there that maybe as a standalone are good, but when you incorporate it into the cockpit with everything else, and it starts talking, and it's only giving you a minor thing right now, and you don't care, and it keeps giving you minor things, you shut it off, you pull the circuit breaker, you do whatever you do. You got to have something that's usable, or a AFCS box or something that is so complex to. If you're a pro pilot and you're using it every day, it's great. But when you sell it to the guy who flies once a month and he gets in there and he's like, I want to use this. So there's a lot to it.
I can't really talk about the technology side of it and the development because that's kind of not my thing. But I think often it comes down to leadership. You know, somebody has to have the vision and then has to establish what the mile markers are to achieve it. And look at the advanced qualification program that NetJets did. You know, NetJets had a vision. They said, you know, sending pilots to, in this case, flight safety every 6 months for a 135, 297 eval, and then periodically, you know, annually going for their 293 eval was completely predictable. Like it was to the point of being gamed. Like they knew it was coming. They knew what the questions were. They knew, you know, what the circle to land maneuver was going to be to a T. And if they didn't know, they were told by the guy who just went through before him or the woman. So the advantage of the aircraft qualification program is that it kind of reshuffles the deck, and it takes away the predictability by design, specifically to create almost a bespoke, you know, uniquely tailored training scenario for pilots. And that's going to require big time leadership. Now we don't need to have the vision because NetJets is already doing it and the FAA is already supporting it, but it's going to, in order for it to work in our industry. And I realize it's going to be very difficult in Europe. I thought it was revealing this morning that there are a lot of really small operators. So it'd be hard to kind of roll them up into a cohesive way, but there are other opportunities for large scale operators to do it. And I think the FAA fortified with their success at NetJets will probably jump on board.
Perfect. Thank you, gentlemen. Any other questions, comments, observations, criticisms? None? Okay. Let's give them another round of applause, please. And Randy?
Gentlemen, very much. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Gentlemen, thank you very much. All right, as we come to the end, again, back to our virtual world out there, I want to say thank you very much for attending. A couple of closing comments. For me, this has been a great day. I would like to say a couple barriers that from this particular conversation that I would like to see broken down. You know, some of the things we have in the industry right now are the fact that corporate America piece of what we do drives a lot of the collaboration limitations. It happens. Companies don't talk to companies. They won't work together. There's lack of mentorship. These are things that in today's world are some of the most critical issues that we can deal with, is being able to take the experience and reach a hand out to the inexperienced. And this is something that is not being addressed. And I challenge you to look at the industry as we see pilots and mechanic shortages, as we see the FAA having limitations as to what they can do. One example is I've had a lot of operators over the years. I've always embraced it as an individual. I believe it's very, very important. Instructional intervention. When we talk about instructors and why we see instructional rates up there, the fact is teaching and training instructional intervention on how to stay out of trouble is something that's left out of a lot of what we do in the instructor world. We train to teach people to get certification, but we don't train them to say, not just, hey, don't crash by verbs, but verbal aspect, but by an actual action, things that we've learned over the years that we can transfer to some of these folks through a mentorship program and give them that instructional intervention techniques to make proper decisions when students are on board. It can be done with that 500-hour, 300-hour, 200-hour instructor, but you have to have the mentorship to do it. As a corporation, I have limitations to where manufacturing, because my company happens to be an alternative to different organization types of training, to where some OEMs won't even allow us to come to have training. I can't send any of my staff there. It's absurd, but it's a reality. And I challenge you as an industry, as I challenge any of other, to fix these problems. Reach a hand out. Look back at organizations that need your hand. I have a lot of single pilot 135 operators that don't know that when they apply to the FAA to get a single pilot 135, that they're taking the same 293, 299 check ride as an organization with 100 pilots. But guess what? They don't have an approved training program. They don't have a GOM. They use a statement of compliance to get the job done. You know what could solve that and get them up to a safer operation? Is the operation down the street that knows they're coming, that offers to help them in their training program. That's what can help the safety. That's what can improve a lot of the data points that we have. So I challenge you when you leave today. I challenge you on the internet. Look at your environment, look at those around you, and make sure that you're an open organization to actually believe in safety and help go out there and do some things that maybe are outside of normal culture to break those barriers and really improve what we have going on. So enough of that. Thank you very much. Again, I have a couple little announcements. We have Brian, Commander Wetzler, he did come back. You're still out there, right? There he is in the back. Did anybody have any questions or comments for his presentation earlier? Again, when he talked about surviving a catastrophic helicopter crash, I had a lot of folks talking on the outside. Did anybody have any additional questions you'd like at the close of the day speak with him? Well, if not, you want to do it personally, if you could raise your hand again in the back. He's back there if you want to have some conversations with him. I think it's a fantastic topic. As we close the day, I would also like to talk about our exhibitors. So out there, we have some exhibitors that they're not necessarily all just trying to sell you something. They have great tools. They have great tools that are referenced on this conference. And for those on the virtual world, you don't get the benefit from it. You will see their names, though, as you go into the web address for here. So conference.vast.aero, AERO, take a look at it and see some of those exhibitors so that you can reach out and see the products that they're offering, again, to help in the safety world. EIT, LZ Control that's out there, they actually have a raffle. So if you're going to be here for a couple days, get in the raffle. They would appreciate that. That's what they're trying to get some information to you, GPMS and Cooler from the rotor vibration or aircraft vibration systems. Really neat technology that they're bringing, some software solutions. So tomorrow morning, it starts at 0800. We do have breakfast beginning at 7 a.m. And to, again, all those in the virtual world, thank you very much for attending. And on behalf of myself and all of the staff here for the VAST conference, we'll close day one just by saying thank you. Have a great evening, and we'll see you tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.